so using the chat facility that can be accessed via the information bar near the centre of your display. This is so that I can take members in the turn as they raise that they wish to speak. So please just indicate by typing "speak please" or "speak" or something like that. Present at today's meeting are members of the Northern Planning Committee, and I intend to now call their name one by one and ask them each to switch on their camera and microphone to introduce themselves and confirm that they can hear proceedings, starting alphabetically with Councillor Liz Braithwaite.
Good morning, Chair. Councillor Liz Braithwaite. I can see and hear well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. Councillor Tony Dean.
Yes, Chairman. I hope you can see me and I hope you can also hear me.
Thank you, Councillor Dean. Councillor Paul Finlow.
Yeah, present and confirmed.
Thank you, Councillor Finlow. Councillor Ailift Harewood. Councillor Harewood, can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
We can hear you, but we can't see you.
One moment. One moment. Can you see me now?
No, but we can hear you. If you can just
confirm. Can't you see me now?
No, but if you can just confirm that you can hear us, that's fine.
I can hear you and I'm present.
Thank you, Councillor Harewood. Councillor Sally Holland.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I can see and hear you and I hope you can hear and see me.
We can indeed. Thank you, Councillor Holland. Councillor David Jeffrey.
Sorry, Chair. Yes, I can see and hear you. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jeffrey. Councillor Ian McFarlane. Councillor McFarlane, are you present? Okay, I'll move on. Councillor Nick Mannion.
Good morning, Chair and everybody. Yes, I can hear and see you clearly.
Thank you, Councillor Mannion. Is Councillor Murphy present? No. Councillor Brian Puddicombe, please.
Yes, good morning, Chair. Thank you. Present and hearing okay.
Thank you very much, Councillor Puddicombe. And finally, Councillor Leslie Smetham. Councillor Smetham, I can see you, but I can't hear you.
Can you, I'm just trying to switch on. Can you hear?
We can now hear and see you. Thank you, Councillor Smetham.
Okay.
And I'll go back to ask Councillor Ian McFarlane, please.
Yes, good morning, Chair. I can hear you loud and clear.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Councillor McFarlane. So we're only missing Councillor Murphy. Thank you very much. Also present are the following officers who are here to advise the committee regarding the applications on the agenda. They are Peter Hooley, Planning and Enforcement Manager, Nikki Folan, Planning Solicitor, Neil Jones, Highways Officer, and Sarah Baxter, Democratic Services Officer. I'll now explain how the committee will operate for this virtual meeting. So the Planning Officer will introduce the application, show the slides, photos and plans regarding the site. I'll then invite any registered public speakers to address the committee and ask them to switch on their camera and microphone and state their name and the name of any group that they might be representing. I'll advise them how much time they have available to speak and that they must finish within this time, or that the microphone may be muted to enable the meeting to continue. If anything the public speaker has said is unclear, I'll clarification. Once they've spoken, the public speakers should then turn off their camera and microphone, but are welcome to listen to the rest of the meeting, the debate and the decision. The planning officer will respond to any issues raised by the public speakers, and then members will be able to ask the planning officer questions before moving on to debate the application. I'd like to remind members to indicate via the chat function if they wish to speak during the debate. When the debate moves to a close, I will check whether officers have any final advice to give in terms of the resolution or any conditions that may have been added, which will have been moved and seconded and are clear to all. I'll then invite each member of the committee by roll call in alphabetical order to turn on their camera and microphone and to confirm their support for the resolution or otherwise by stating for, against or not voting. The result of the vote will be then reported back to the meeting. Members of the committee can only participate in and vote on the application if they can both hear and be heard throughout. If a member loses their connection and is able to alert us to this fact, the meeting may be able to adjourn for a short time to allow them to reconnect. If they're unable to reconnect within a short time, the meeting will continue without them and they will be unable to participate in or vote on that application. If the live stream of the meeting fails, the meeting will be adjourned for a reasonable time to try and restore the connection. But if it's not possible to do this, the meeting will have to be postponed to a new date. Please note that the meeting is being recorded and streamed live to the public. And please also note that there will be a fire alarm test at 11 a.m. We'll now move on to item 1 of the agenda, which is apologies for absence. Mrs. Sarah Baxter, are there any apologies for absence, please?
Yes, Chairman. Apologies from Councillor Nicholas, and his substitute is Councillor Jeffrey.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Baxter. Item number 2 is declarations of interest. Before I invite declarations from members, can I just say on behalf of all of us, I believe we've received an email this morning on behalf of Higher Poynton in relation to the item number 5, application 19/5920M. And also, I believe that we've all received a hard copy of a representation from the applicant in respect of item 7, that's 18/4540M. Can I now ask members, are there any further declarations of interest that you wish to alert us to?
Yes.
Councillor Paul Finlow, please.
Yes, just for information and openness, I'm an old boy of the King's School in relation to the last item, and also I was a governor, but I'm not now and haven't been for nearly a year. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Finlow. Councillor Tony Dean, please.
Yes, Chairman. On item 6, the application for Fernley and Knutsford, I called it in, and as such, I've obviously formed an opinion already. So after I've spoken as the ward councillor on that issue, I shall leave the meeting and return for item 7.
Thank you, Councillor Dean. Councillor Howe, did you make a declaration?
Yes, can you hear me, Chair?
We can hear you perfectly, thank you.
I should make a declaration on 18/4540M, and that's the King's School application. We have met at the Town Council planning, and on page 45, I wish to say that I have made a predetermination that we have approved that application.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Harewood. So
thank you very much.
We will invite you to leave the meeting.
Yes, of course.
We move on to that item. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Paul Finlow, we can still see you at the moment.
Sorry.
Could you camera off, please? Thank you. I'll now move to Councillor Nick Mannion and then Councillor Puddicombe.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Relating to item 7 on today's agenda, application 18/4540M, the McCarthy and Stone application. I'm also an old boy of the King's School, but I'm more than happy to state that I've not attended any event at the school or had any involvement with the school since I left the gates after completing my A-levels 41 years ago this month. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Mannion. Councillor Brian Puddicombe, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the same application, 184540M, the site of the King's School. The Town Councillor Speaker, Fiona Wilson, is well known to me because we represent the same ward and she is also my wife. I can confirm that we have never discussed the issue and I have not predetermined it.
So that's just in the interest of openness and transparency. Thank you for confirming, Councillor. Yeah, thank you very much. Any further declarations, members? Okay, I'll take it that I can move on. Item 3 is the minutes of the previous meeting, the last time we actually met face to face, which took place on the 11th of March 2020. I would like to propose the minutes of the meeting. Councillor Tony Dean, as the Vice Chair of the committee, are you prepared to second that proposal?
I will second the minutes, Chair.
Thank you very much. So it's been moved and seconded that the minutes be approved as a correct record. I'll now invite again each member of the committee in alphabetical order to confirm their support or otherwise by stating for, against or not voting. When members do so, please will they turn on their camera and identify themselves and then turn it off again. Starting with Councillor Liz Braithwaite, please.
Councillor Liz Braithwaite, for. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. Councillor Tony Dean.
Councillor Tony Dean, for.
Thank you. Councillor Paul Findlow.
For.
Thank you, Councillor Findlow. Councillor Ailift Harewood.
For.
Thank you, Councillor Harewood. Councillor Sally Holland.
Councillor Sally Holland, for.
Thank you, Councillor Holland. Councillor David Jeffrey.
Councillor Jeffrey, abstain, Chair, because I wasn't present.
Thank you. Councillor Ian McFarlane.
Yes, Councillor Ian McFarlane, Chair, for.
Thank you, Councillor McFarlane. Councillor Nick Mannion, please.
Councillor Nick Mannion, for. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mannion. Councillor Brian Puddicombe.
I wasn't present either, Chair, so I abstain.
Thank you. Councillor Brendan Murphy, I see that you've now joined us. Would you like to record your vote on the minutes from the last meeting? You're on mute, Councillor Murphy. We can't hear you. I think you're still on mute. That's
Can
it.
you hear me now?
We can, yeah.
Right, sorry. I mean, only just connected. I have a lot of difficulties, and I don't know what you've been saying, so I better just abstain.
Thank you, Councillor Murphy. And finally, Councillor Leslie Smetham.
Councillor Leslie Smetham, I approve the minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Smetham. So they're clearly carried for approval. Thank you for that, everybody. Moving on to, before I move on to item 4, Councillor Murphy, could you turn your camera off, please? Thank you. So item 4 is public speaking time. This sets out the public speaking rules for the committee. Members and members of the public who have pre-registered to speak will be invited to do so as we move on to the appropriate item. I will call them forward. So we'll now move on to the first planning application. Before we do so, Councillor Murphy, your camera's still on. Thank you very much. So we'll now move to the first application, which is item number 5 on the agenda. Application number 19/5920M, erection of a pair of 3-bedroom semi-detached dwellings within an infill plot off Strigley Road North, land between 18 and 26 Strigley Road North, Poynton, for Ms. Lindsay Jones. Can I now invite our planning officer, Mr. Peter Hooley, to present this application? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll now just bring up the presentation. Okay, so the proposal is for the erection of 2 semi-detached dwellings. This is set out on pages 9 to 21 of your report pack. So here's an aerial photograph of the site. Okay, so the site is here, so Shrigley Road North in this location. We can see the Middlewood Way here, and then the canal further to this side of the screen here. Again, this is just a site plan, again showing that position of the plot in relation to the adjoining residential properties along Shrigley Road North. And this map here is taken from the Poynton Neighbourhood Plan. And members will be aware there is a history to this application, which is set out in the report. And since the application was a different application was refused on this site, the Poynton Neighbourhood Plan has been formally made, and this is the map of the infill boundary from within that plan. And you can see here that red dot there is the application site within the infill boundary. I'm just going to run through some site photographs. These ones are taken from Google Maps, and I have some other more recent up-to-date ones here. So we can see the site here in between number 26 and number 18. And again, this showing it from the north. So again, number 26 over here, and this bungalow here is number 18, and the application site is here. It was the former garden area of that property. And again, this is showing a photograph over the hedge, out down through the site. More up-to-date photographs here, again showing number 26 and the side elevation there, and likewise the bungalow at number 18. This is taken again slightly further up the road, so you can see the existing bungalow here. This gives a picture of the existing properties further along the road. Likewise, a shot taken in the other direction, so the terrace properties opposite, and the semi-detached dwellings and other terrace properties that run down this side of the road that is the same side as the application site. And again, a more up-to-date shot showing the new development in the background there, and obviously the hedge has grown up further since those other shots were taken. And again, this is showing the current street scene taken from the pavement. And finally, one further shot just giving the sort of overall context of the site. Again, the application site being in this area here. So moving to the plans themselves. So this is the proposed site plan. Revisions have been obtained during the course of the application. A couple of different revisions. It has been reduced in scale, and then latterly, originally also proposed a decking area out here, which has also been removed for privacy reasons. But the main change that was made was originally the application came in with built form in this area here to the side, and that's now been removed. So this shows the roof plan. You've got 3 metres to both boundaries, 2 parking spaces at the front. You can see the building line is commensurate with other properties. This is single storey at the back. So it, in terms of normal policies, it complies with all sort of amenity standards. This is a proposed front elevation, and again we'll see in a minute that this sort of mirrors the design of other properties along Shrigley Road North. And this is the rear elevation, so you can see the steps down because the levels drop off at the back. The materials are appropriate to the area. We've got red tone multi-brick, natural timber, and grey slate spec tiles. And these are the side elevations, showing the southwest and northeast elevations. So again, the mass, compared to the previous applications, the mass of the building's been brought down by narrowing this width of the dwelling here. Here's the ground floor plan. and the first floor plan. So you can see they're both 3-bedroom properties, and this is the single-storey projection out at the rear. Now here's the proposed street scene. So we can see at the top here, this is the existing street scene drawing. So we can see the application site in here where the red pointer is. And then the proposed street scene at the bottom of the screen here. So you can see we've maintained that 3-metre distance to the side. Compare that to the adjoining property here that goes up to the boundary. So in terms of it being commensurate with spacing of other properties, it exceeds those standards compared to some of the others in the street scene. And in terms of height, it mirrors the height of the adjacent semi-detached property. As noted in the report, the height is obviously higher than the bungalow on this side, but the bungalow is essentially the outlier there, with the properties going back up to 2-storey on this side. Now, I thought it'd be useful for members to see the applications that have been refused previously, just from the street scene, so we can see the differences there. So this is one application that was refused, and you can see the height of this building was above the adjoining semi-detached property, and also the ground levels here sunk further down, so you had a larger dwelling. Then we had a further refused application. Whilst the height was brought down, it had these areas of buildings to the side of the site, which took it up to the side boundaries and also dug down. Again, and that was felt to be unacceptable. This was what was submitted originally with this application. As I mentioned before, we had the areas to the side here, which again was considered to be of too much mass, given its greenbelt site. And now we finally have the scheme that's before us, and we feel now it's been a long journey to get there, but now we've got something which fits in well with the street scene. It's at the appropriate level, the appropriate height, and has good spacing to the side boundaries. So in summary, based on recent previous decisions by the council for the development of this site, the key issues are the design and scale of the proposed dwellings and compliance with Greenbelt policy for infill, as set out in the report. It's considered the applicant has revised the scheme and addressed those issues, and the scheme is now compliant with development plan policy, and therefore the application should be approved, subject to the conditions set out on page 19 and 20 of the committee report.
Thank you very much,
Thank
Peter.
you,
Thank you. So we will now move on to the public speakers. Can I just remind members, if they would like to ask a question of any of the public speakers, please can you indicate via the chat function so that I can come to you in the order that you've raised that you wish to ask a question. So can I now invite the ward councillor, Councillor Joss Saunders, to turn on her camera and microphone.
I don't know if you can see me, Chairman. I've had problems with the camera.
I can't see you, Councillor Saunders, but we can hear you. So
yes,
we'll
apologies for that. I've never had this problem before, and IT can't seem to resolve it at the moment. So
we can hear you perfectly. So we'll go with that. So you have 5 minutes, Councillor Saunders, from when you're ready to start. Please do so.
Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, everyone. This is a very contentious planning application, which has been refused as outlined on a number of occasions. I'm actually going to be very brief in outlining my objections because they do rest on why they were refused previously, which is the point of limited infill and openness of the Greenbelt. I would state that this application is not materially different to the previous one, which was rejected. The main difference appears to be that they no longer have a garage at the side of them, but it still does have a detrimental effect on the area and completely compromises the openness of the Greenbelt, which was why it was rejected previously. The application is to build 2 houses in the garden of the adjacent bungalow. Some of you will have attended previous site visits previously. You will know that currently the view is of open fields. If these houses are built, these views would be obscured, thus compromising the principle of openness. This is underpinned by the Poynton Neighbourhood Plan, which states that Any proposed development should preserve the openness of the Greenbelt as one of the essential characteristics of the Greenbelt includes open views of the countryside. Poynton, together, Town Council, together with numerous partners, worked very long and hard on this Poynton neighbourhood plan, and I do hope that this principle is upheld and that this application is rejected. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Saunders. Could I just ask you to turn your microphone off briefly, and I will ask members if there are any questions they wish to ask you. Members, please could you indicate in the chat function if there's anything you wish to put to Councillor Saunders. I think Councillor Harewood is seeking to ask a question. Councillor Harewood.
Thank you, Chair. I just wish to ask if the openness will still remain at the sides of this current planning. How does she describe that the openness is so thoroughly compromised and not just partly? Or does she appreciate that it's just partly and not altogether so?
Thank you, Councillor Harewood. Councillor Saunders, please.
No, I don't accept that. A previous application was refused on the height, but the width was the same as this current application. It compromised the openness of the Greenbelt.
Thank you, Councillor Saunders. I believe there are no further questions. No. Okay. Thank you, Councillor Saunders. Please turn off your microphone and camera, but do feel free to stay in the meeting and listen to the debate. I'll now move on to our second public speaker. I'd like to call Town Councillor Lawrence Clark, representing Poynton Town Council, to address the committee. Mr. Clark, Councillor Clark, you also have 5 minutes speaking time. Please begin when you are ready.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
We can hear you perfectly.
Thank you. Right. First of all, I'd like to reiterate the point, this is not a brownfield site. It's currently, for many years, it's been the garden of the bungalow next door. It used to be kept very nicely at one time. The previous application, as has been said, was rejected because it was not limited infilling. And I agree with what Councillor Saunders has said. There's only minor changes in this latest version. It's still not limited infilling. It's still substantial infilling. They've only removed the garages at the side, and I won't be surprised in the least if future occupants don't try and build garages at the sides. There's a material loss of openness, which is the whole point of the green belt. To take up the point that Councillor Aylift raised, there's now a 60-metre gap on this site, and that'll be replaced by 2 3-metre gaps at the side, which just isn't the same. 51 metres of openness gone, and I believe that it's a serious offence against the green belt. I would also like to draw your attention to what I regret to say is an inaccuracy in the officer's report. In the final section where it says planning balance, conclusions and reasons for the decision, your planning officer has said the site is in a sustainable location with access to a range of local services and facilities nearby, including public transport links. I must disagree with that, Mr. Chairman. As you know full well, there are no buses in Poynton at all now. So there is no public transport links. It's 2 miles to the nearest shop, and it's 3 miles to the railway station. And it's also a considerable walk uphill when you're coming back. So it's inevitable that access to these properties will be by private car. There's no way people are going to carry all their shopping back all the way up Park Lane and Coppice Road. It's clearly contrary to policies of your council on accessibility and sustainability, policies SD1, SD2 and CO1. And talking of COs brings us to CO2. We hear about climate emergencies and so on. But we have here a development recommended for approval, which will only result in more carbon dioxide being released, plus also building on what is currently a perfectly innocuous garden containing plants. So I would urge you to reject this on 2 reasons. I would urge members to reject this application for 2 reasons. The first being it is clearly still contrary to the green belt. It is not limited infilling, it is substantial infilling. And secondly, that it's not a sustainable location, there's no public transport, and access will inevitably be by the private car, with all the environmental impacts that inevitably result from that. So I'll urge members to reject it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Clark. Could I just ask you to stay online for a moment while I ask members if they have any questions for you? I can see that Councillor Nick Mannion would like to ask a question. Councillor Mannion, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. It's regarding the public transport. I understand the 391 and 392 services were suspended because of the withdrawal of the previous operator, Manchester Community Transport. But I do understand that it's always been the intention that the service will be reinstated with the new operator. And I understand that's about to happen in the near future. Are you aware of that?
I'm aware that is the council's intention, but I think perhaps I don't know if your chairman can update us for his other responsibilities as a cabinet member, because I think for public transport falls into his area. My understanding is that is the council's intention, but as yet, the Poynton Town Council has received no indication of when new buses might start, and any of us who've been involved in put it this way, we've got a Poynton Relief Road that's been in the road programme one way or the other since 1948. So I hope we still won't be waiting for buses in 72 years' time, but there's often in the public sector in Britain, there's a gap between intentions and actions, is my experience.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Can I move on to the next question, Councillor Mannion?
Yes, but I certainly hope that the reinstatement of the bus service for the residents of Poynton doesn't take 72 years. I think I understand it's hoped that in a matter of days or weeks, not years. Thank you.
For another meeting, but to answer the question, I can confirm that the service will be introduced from Monday next week. Councillor David Jeffrey, please.
Thanks, Chair. Councillor Clark, could I ask if you've got any knowledge of, in quite a few of the objections, there's mention of flooding and electrical power deficiencies. Are you aware of any of these issues on that?
Oh, yes, very much so. There have been problems in Poynton with flooding over the last 3 years generally. That part of Poynton is higher than the Poynton village, and there's an issue with when we have these severe thunderstorms, which again, they haven't hit Poynton or Cheshire East, but Rochdale was flooded out a couple of days ago. It could perfectly well happen again. And there's considerable concern that building on land that currently, that's a garden, it's a sponge. You build a house on it, it won't be absorbing water. Water will be running off and going into the drains. And that brings us to two other points. The infrastructure up there, both electricals and water and sewage, were installed, I think, in the 30s to the 50s. There's been a lot of development generally since then. You know, if you added up all the houses or conversions into houses has been in Higher Poynton over the last 50 years, you'll come up with a lot. Residents up there regularly suffer from power cuts, their electrical systems shut down, and there's issues all the way down Coppice Road where the sewers run, with people complaining that there's horrible things appear backflow into their lavatories and so on. People have had to have reverse valves fitted into their houses, and sometimes when it rains heavily, the lids of the manholes pop off in the road. So there is certainly an issue generally with infrastructure there, both say electricity, water and sewage all have problems.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Councillor Liz Braithwaite, please.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Clark, the location is within the Poynton Neighbourhood Plan infill boundary, but you say it's not limited infill. What kind of development would be acceptable within the boundary? Thank you.
Well, we're obviously talking speculation here, but what I would say is currently there's a 60-metre wide gap. What is proposed is that essentially 51 metres of that will be taken up. I don't think taking up 51 out of 60 metres of a gap is limited infill. I would interpret limited infill as being a development that was substantially smaller and preserved, I would say, well over half the existing gap. But that's, of course, talking speculatively.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Any further questions, members, please? Councillor Harewood.
Thank you, Chair. I don't know if you can see me.
We can.
But one of my questions has been answered about the transport. Can I ask Councillor if he would accept a smaller building rather than none at all? From what I heard, he did not say that, but will he be willing to accept something less than what is proposed? Because I don't think the transport question has been, the transport question has already been answered. Would you be thinking that a smaller building or one building will be acceptable? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harewood. Councillor Clark, we addressed the transport question. If you could address the second part, that would be great.
Again, it's a speculative point, and I can't speak on behalf of the Town Council. You do appreciate that. I can't say the Town Council would recommend approval or rejection of anything, because I just can't. I'm just one. I'm first among equals, as you are, Chairman, when we're discussing these things at the Town Council. What I would say is it's likely that my colleagues would be more willing to review something as limited infill if it preserved a greater degree of openness, which I say is currently 60 metres of openness in the gap, and what is proposed is just two small 3-metre gaps at each side, which means that 51 out of 60 metres of openness will go. We would be more likely to recommend approval of something which preserved substantially more, probably more than half of the existing openness.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Councillor Sally Holland, please.
Oh yes, thank you, Chair. Good morning, Councillor Clark. Just a quick question. If a covenant was issued to this application to restrict any future additional plans, would that satisfy your reservations, which you brought up earlier?
Well, one aspect of our opposition is a suspicion that in future occupants may think that they should be able to install a garage or extension at the side. It's certainly possible. I don't know how effective, though, things are stopping that. We're always told that covenants are nothing to do with the planning system, so I'm slightly confused by the question. Because planning officers always say that covenants are private things, which the Cheshire East can't enforce. But that it's a loss of openness, and there's already an awful lot of openness lost with what is proposed.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Councillor Findlow, did you wish to speak? Ask a question, sorry.
Yes, please. This possibly reinstated bus, how near does it go to this site? Does it go to Higher Poynton?
I can't answer on behalf, obviously, if your chairman is one of his other responsibilities. If the bus were reinstated, and if, we've got two ifs there, it followed the previous route, and there's no guarantee that it would, but if it followed the route of the bus which disappeared in April, it would go right past the house. If the bus were there, it would address the transport, that aspect of the transport issue. But it isn't there now, and a future bus operator might say they were more willing to just have a bus that went to the main part of Poynton Village.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Any further questions, members? Okay, I'll take it that there are not. Thank you very much, Councillor Clark. Please turn off your microphone and camera, but do feel free to stay on the meeting to follow the debate that will follow. Could I now invite Hayley Whitaker, who is an objector, to address the committee, please. Mrs. Whitaker, if you could turn on your camera and microphone. Thank you very much. Mrs. Whitaker, you have 3 minutes. Please start when you're ready.
Thanks, Chair. As everyone can everyone hear me okay before I start? Is that okay?
We can indeed.
Yeah, okay, thank you. This application demonstrates little difference to previously rejected attempts to build on this site. My submissions today will focus on 3. 1, the overmassing of the site, 2, its character, and 3, highway safety concerns. Prior to the meeting today, members will have received an email depicting a previous site application of 172129M and the current proposal. The picture speaks 1,000 words, folks, and I probably can't put it better than the image depicts, but this evidence clearly demonstrates that there is very little difference between the application today and the previous application that this committee rejected. The past example I refer to is entitled Erection of 2 semi-detached dwellings alongside the existing detached bungalow. This is exactly the same as the application before us now. The width of the properties are the same. This committee refused the previous application on 2 grounds. Proposed development does not reflect local character by virtue of the bulk and massing of the proposed dwelling, and detrimental to the interests of highway safety due to inaccessible car parking. I will deal with each of these in turn now in relation to the current application, because the current application does not address these issues at all and actually exacerbates the problems that led to a refusal of planning permission last time. Firstly, overmassing of the site and character. The application before us presents an increase in the overmassing of the site from previously rejected applications. The problem, in my opinion, has got worse. It presents a larger footprint because the rear build line is much deeper than previous applications and existing dwellings. It is contrary to Poynton's neighbourhood plan, HOU 11 and HOU 12, because it eliminates the openness and compromises Greenbelt policy. Secondly, the proposed still does not reflect the local character. It is to be built in the old garden of a 1-storey bungalow. The proposed dwellings will tower over the existing property. Thirdly, the impact on highway safety has not been resolved. The vehicles depicted on the plans sit behind trees and hedges, and car parking is still inaccessible on the site. You have seen from the planning officer's presentation today that Shrigley Road North is narrow, with parking directly opposite the site for the residents of terraced houses that do not have off-road parking. This couple, sorry?
30 seconds remaining.
Oh, right, sorry, right, okay. This coupled with the turning manoeuvres from the proposed dwellings is dangerous and proposes further problems for highway safety. The fact remains that to cram 2 semi-detached dwellings on this site is not practicable, and it's unneighbourly, and the developers need to realise that by submitting the same application time and time again, still contravenes planning regulations and causes the same problems and exacerbates these issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Whittaker. Can I ask members, are there any questions? Please can I also remind you to use the chat facility, because I can't actually see who's raising their hand and who isn't. So if you use the chat facility, I can see, but I can also see the order in which you register that you want to ask a question. Councillor Ailey-Sherwood.
I'm sorry. Which button is the chat facility, please? I can't.
There are three dots. 3 dots in the middle of the screen. There's an icon next to that, which is a hand, and it's the one.
Oh, I've done that. I've done that.
Not the hand one. Not the hand one. The one immediately to the right of that. But anyway, please ask your question, Councillor Howard.
All right. So am I on to speak now?
You are indeed.
Thank you, Chair. Can I ask the resident, is she aware that there have been new drawings to coincide with the height of the buildings? Is she currently aware of that? Is she currently aware that the new drawings?
We've heard the question, Councillor Howard.
Okay,
Could I invite the speaker to answer now?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I am aware, and I actually put a response into the revised drawings that were published on June the 5th. From my recollection, those drawings I'm not sure they've done much towards the height of the building here. I'm looking at the footprint specifically. The footprint is the same as the previously rejected application, if not worse, because the footprint's deeper. In terms of the height of the buildings are still towering over the bungalow next door.
Thank you, Mrs. Whittaker. Are there any further questions, please, members? Okay. I will take it that there are not. Thank you, Councillor Smetham. So thank you very much, Mrs. Whittaker. Can I now invite, excuse me, firstly, Councillor Harewood to turn her camera off. And secondly, can I invite the next public speaker, Mr. Bob Phillips, who is the agent for the applicant, to turn on his camera and microphone and prepare to address the committee. Mr. Phillips.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you. You have 3 minutes, Mr. Phillips. Please begin when you're ready.
Good morning. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak this morning. I represent the applicant and owner of this site, Miss Lindsay Jones, not a developer. This application proposes the construction of an infill development comprising now of 2 3-bedroom semi-detached dwellings within the settlement of Higher Poynton. Just for clarity and in the avoidance of doubt, contrary to what was said by one of our earlier speakers, the gap that we're infilling here is actually 21 metres and not 60 metres. So I just wanted to make that very, very clear. You can measure that from the application drawings. I'm not going to go over the history of the subject of the previous infill applications, but as you will see, the principle of infill development has previously been accepted on this site, but the design, scale and quantum has been considered unacceptable in the past. This scheme is smaller than with all previous applications. It's a reduction in the width of each home when viewed from the road and the height of the ridge. These now directly reflect both the width and height of the adjacent semi-detached properties. Okay, the number of bedrooms has been reduced and the overall footprint has also been reduced. There are now larger gaps between the homes and the plot boundaries, as your officer pointed out. We work closely with the planning officers to ensure that the design reflects the feedback given on previous schemes for this site. The detailed design seeks to mimic the character and appearance of the surrounding properties and sit comfortably within the street scene. You've seen the street scenes that have been submitted by your officer that we've submitted. They show the large open gaps between the homes. As he said, the justification focuses on 2 policies, PG3 of the local plan strategy and HO21 and its infill boundary of the Maid Poynton neighbourhood plan. Your officers have considered them in great depth in the report. We fully endorse the approach they've taken and the conclusions that they've presented. What I do want to make a note of is just that representations have been made by neighbours about impact on openness of the greenbelt. And I want to point out that given the High Court judgment, this is considered an exception in the greenbelt, and therefore openness is not a consideration where the test of an exception is met. Full details of this are in your officer's report. I'm happy to answer questions on that. So this application is the result of considerable work by the applicant, their architect and your officers to arrive at a mutually acceptable design. We respectfully ask the committee to grant planning permission in line with recommendations from your officers. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Phillips. Are there any questions, please, members? Councillor Dean, I'm aware you want to ask a question to officers. I'll come to you at the end of the public speaking. So any questions to Mr. Phillips, please? No questions, it looks like. So thank you very much, Mr. Phillips. Please turn your camera and microphone off, but do feel free to stay in the meeting to listen to the debate that will follow. So firstly, Mr. Hooley, could I come back to you and just ask, are there any questions or any issues that have been raised by the public speakers that you would like to address now?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. So further to the public speaking we heard there, just a few points to pick up on. As the applicant's agent rightly picked up, the site frontage is not 60 metres, it's 21 metres. This gives the frontage of each property around about 10 metres each, with a 3 metre gap to the side. And that is, as I say, actually more than commensurate with the surrounding properties in the area which don't have those spacings to the boundary. I think another point that was raised in terms of sustainability, this proposal there is a condition for electrical vehicle charging points, to remind members of that. But in terms of overall sustainability, it is within, say, we've got a newly made neighbourhood plan, and it is within the infill boundary, which sets out the principle of allowing infill. So it would not be sort of rational, if you like, to then argue that it's not sustainable to have any housing in that infill area. That is the adopted development plan. So I don't think the focus should be on things like bus services and things, because that wasn't drawn out in previous reasons for refusal. So really, I think the focus here should be on compliance with Greenbelt policy and the design of the dwellings, because that's ultimately what the previous application was refused on. So I'd like to just direct members' attention to those particular issues. And turning to the infill point, I think it's important members set out on page 15 and 16 of your report. Members will note there is a thorough assessment against the neighbourhood plan policy, which deals with infill. And if this proposal isn't an infill plot or an infill proposal, then it's difficult to actually understand what would be. It does comply with the policy. And the applicant's agent is correct in saying, once you've decided it's an infill plot and an infill development, you can't go on to do a second test on openness of the greenbelt, because that is deemed an appropriate form of development if it is indeed considered to be a limited infill. And as I say, very clearly we're of the view that it is now limited infill, and actually it's good that the agents actually work to get a scheme that is, as opposed to necessarily challenging other decisions there. So that's the position we've got. I'm happy to take any further questions member may have. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Hooley. Councillor Tony Dean, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. A couple of questions on the summary. Just for clarification, it says the site has been included in the Cheshire East Site Allocation and Development Policy document. I understand that is still under review and could still be changed and is not actually made yet. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct, and it's rather than the site specifically, it's actually that referring to that infill, linking to the neighbourhood plan, and actually you're right. The greater weight is the neighbourhood plan, which is the infill boundary. That was just mentioned for completeness, but we wouldn't give that much weight as things stand at the moment.
Okay, and the second question for a clarification. It says at the end of the summary, in the light of section 38 bracket 6 close brackets of the Planning and Compulsory Purchase Act 2004. Planning permission should be granted. Probably there's quite a few of us who don't know what section 38 bracket 6 close brackets is.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Dean. Essentially, that's one of the fundamental principles that development proposals should be determined in accordance with the development plan, unless there are material considerations that indicate otherwise. And that is actually strength. That's why obviously now we have a made neighbourhood plan, which is part of that development plan. So the fact that, as I said, it's set out in the report, the development is in accordance with that, unless there are material considerations that indicate otherwise, then but you know, under that statute, then the development should be approved.
Okay, final question. You say there's no secondary test of openness, which I understand is established in a case now, a legal case, which happy to accept that. So your question really was whether this was limited infill or simply infill. And do you have any criteria by which to measure that, or is it like so much else in the planning system? Is it subjective? Whether this is limited infill?
There is a judgment to be had, and obviously that will be each case on its merits, but there is guidance for that, and that is set out in the infill policy of HOU1, and that's set out in detail on pages 15 and 16 of the report. So, for example, it talks about infilling only being a narrow gap, normally capable of taking 1 or 2 dwellings. So this is the scenario we have here. If it was actually a wider gap, or much wider gap, what you wouldn't want to see is then only the partial filling of those gaps, because then incrementally you would have infilling of much larger gaps. Actually, this is exactly the type and size of gap at 20 metres that would adequately fit 2 properties that really limited infill policy should be designed to meet. There is the test of openness at point 1 of that policy, and I think, again, that's addressed in the report. That is quite a challenging concept to understand if you say, well, how can you have anything? Because any building will have an impact on openness to a degree, but this is where you look at it in its site context, with the property surrounding it and the context of the residential area it's in within the Greenbelt, And that's why we're very, very clear that this is acceptable under that policy.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Dean. Before I move on to the next speaker, I had a question actually. There was a point raised during the public speaking in relation to a covenant and whether that was an appropriate vehicle through which to restrict further development on the site. Were members minded to approve? Question to Mr. Hooley, if members were minded to approve, is there any reason we would not seek to add a permitted development condition to the list of conditions removing permitted development rights? Because I believe that's probably what the speaker was referring to rather than a covenant.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. My apologies, I should have picked up on that point. Yes, that's exactly right. It's not a covenant as such, but it would be a condition to remove permitted development rights. I think given what we've heard, if members were inclined to do so then we could add a condition that would remove what's known as Class A for extensions to dwellings, and I would suggest additionally, potentially you could consider alterations to the roof on there as well, so that would be Class B. Outbuildings would be Class E, so members would have to consider if that was a factor. But essentially, yes, we could have a condition that would restrict permitted development rights. That would mean any future extensions of that nature would have to come back to be determined by the planning authority rather than someone being able to do it without planning permission.
Thank you, Mr. Hooley. Councillor David Jeffrey, please.
Thanks, Chair. Mr. Hooley, I've got a few questions if I can ask them. So, the first one's probably for highways actually. So, are there any concerns about pulling out of that driveway onto essentially a single lane road because there's parking opposite? That I can see that with the kind of layout of the driveway, inevitably they're going to have to reverse in or reverse out. So I'm just wondering if there's any concerns about that. Secondly, I don't like development of the green belt, but because we have to deal with planning policy, I'm quite comfortable with the openness and that's not being closed down and the limited infill. What I'm not quite sure about is this additional clause that seems to be in the point and neighbourhood plan about the including open views of the countryside. Could you comment on that and rationalise that for me? Thirdly, in one of the objectors, they quote a High Court judgment, Arboot versus Eldridge Borough Council. Just wondering if that's relevant and if you've considered it, if you're aware of it. And finally, it's just a point of clarification, really, or curiosity. And I note that the houses adjacent are 18 and 24. Does that mean at some point there were numbers 20 and 22 there? Or has this always been a garden? Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Jeffrey. Mr. Hooley, please.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. On the highways point, first of all, having been to the site, the properties down Shrigley Road North all have the same arrangement, or certainly the most of them do. So I think this would be perfectly compatible with how other properties are accessing the driveways at the moment on that road. So I don't think there would be a highway safety point. And equally, it's important to bear in mind that that hasn't been a reason for refusal on the previous application. So it's not something we should look to introduce at this stage. In terms of the garden, I think I'm not 100% sure of the history of the numbers on that road, but it's clearly been garden of number 18 for a long time. So I think for that's how it should be treated, essentially, as that open plot. In terms of considering this application, I don't think we should give any weight, even if there were previous buildings there in the past. In terms of the case law, I think we set out in the report what we consider to be the most relevant case law to this particular issue that we've got at hand and the most up to date. So I don't think it would be right to comment further on any other legislation. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Hooley. Councillor Sally Holland, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you for getting the correct terminology. Yes, it was not a covenant. Yeah, just a quick question to Paul. I've looked at the plans and I've looked at.
Sorry, Councillor Holland, would you like to just pause for a second while we have the fire drill?
Of course. The usual 11 o'clock one.
Okay, please continue.
Yeah, I was just looking at some. One was an objection, which I think was from 18 Libris Place, and two comments during the months of February and March from Tyndale. Tyndale doesn't seem to object, just asking some questions. So, how many objections to this proposal have there been? And I was curious because one of the speakers seemed to be a neighbour, and I wondered whether they were one of the properties, either Tyndale or 18 Libris Place. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Holland. Mr. Hooley, please.
Well, I think, yeah, excuse me, Chair. I think those properties you referred to are actually on the next application in the agenda. Tyndale and Libris Place is the application, Knutsford. So, in terms of this one, the objections are set out in the report, and I can just confirm that it says that we've had representations from 50 different properties. So there have been obviously a lot of local objection to it, as we know, and yes, I understand that that includes people who do live in close proximity to the site. I haven't got all the address details in front of me, but hopefully that answers the question. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brian Puddicombe, please.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Clark mentioned the flooding issues, and we know that there have been very recent history of flooding in this area. I know United Utilities have raised no objections subject to appropriate drainage conditions. Could Mr. Hooley give me assurances or give the committee assurances that he feels that this is covered properly in the recommendations or in the points, I guess it's points 12 and 13, because this is obviously an issue in the area, and I would like that assurance. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Puddicombe. Mr. Hooley again, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I can assure you that there's not an issue with this particular application. The details, have been assessed. It doesn't generate the requirement for a flood risk assessment, and I think the speaker was raising a more general point on development, certainly at high levels, and then how that impacts sort of downstream, if you like. And that's not something which would be specific to the detail of this application in terms of flood risk on site. As I say, we have no indication that there's any reason to refuse the application for on any grounds of flood risk.
Thanks, Mr. Hooley. Councillor Paul Finlow, please.
Thank you, Chairman. A couple of points, if I may. We were told, I think if I recollect correctly, that openness is not particularly relevant here based on a particular case. Is this settled law with a string of cases to that effect? Or is it that, as is usually the case in these matters, if you wanted to, you could find a case law authority to the contrary? I suspect the latter. Secondly, we were told in relation to highways, but it could apply to other matters, we shouldn't seek to introduce at this stage such matters as highways. I thought, why has this been disapplied? That each case should be judged on its individual merits. Why should we disregard other factors? And thirdly, on page 19, Chairman, it says in relation to this site about access to a range of local services and facilities nearby. I emphasise the word nearby. Now, again, we're asked for some reason to disregard it. I'm not quite sure why we should discount those factors. Is it true that it's 2 miles to the nearest shops and 3 miles to the railway station? I suspect, without having measured it myself, that it is true. So I don't see why, given the importance in other cases often of it being in a sustainable location, we should again be invited to disapply that factor. 3 points.
Thank you, Councillor Finlow. I'll invite Mr. Hooley to now answer those points.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Finlow. In terms of the case law point, to clarify, that is a point specifically around once you've considered something being appropriate development, i.e. not inappropriate development, which as development would be if it didn't fall within one of the exceptions of paragraph 145 of the National Planning Policy Framework. Once you've made that assessment, if there isn't a specific test in the policy clause of openness in the National Planning Policy Framework, in this case it's limited infilling in villages, then what the case law is saying is that you should not go on to make that second test. So as we've discussed, it's right to consider openness in terms of the context of the policy as to whether it's limited infill, and that's been done and set out in the report. But you can't, if you consider it meets the test of being limited infill, you can't then come up with a second test of it's harming the openness, as essentially any development would to some degree. So that's just getting that matter of principle set out. In terms of the highways matter, I don't think it's a matter of disregarding them. It's a matter of stating that they're acceptable in this particular case, but also about consistency, because the council has made that decision in the past on this site with essentially the same access details. So it wouldn't be reasonable to come to a different conclusion from the same committee, the same council again. So that I'm just highlighting that point. Similarly with the sustainability issue, I think yes, whether the report could, I can understand where the speaker was coming from in raising that point, but I think the sustainability point is emphasising it's set out within the infill village boundary, which by its definition is giving it a level of sustainability for where that housing and infill housing should go. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Mr. Hooley. I think that's all the questions from members back to officers. So perhaps we could now move to the debate members. I'm not sure which councillor is closest in terms of which ward. It's probably between councillors Murphy and Findlow. Would either of you or indeed any other member like to volunteer to open the debate, please?
Well, I could say a few words since you've kindly invited me. This case concerns me because it seems so similar to previous cases which have been rejected by the committee. I did hear what was said in relation to my 3 points, but I think they still have some substance, Chairman. I don't think it's a very sustainable location. I do think we should preserve the greenbelt. I'm afraid infill is being used increasingly. There are precedents for this, which is unfortunate, to question the greenbelt principle, and I really don't like that. So I have significant concerns about this case for a number of reasons. Highways, I think, is a relatively minor one, but it is a factor given the parking practice on that road. And certainly I do think the railway station and so on and local services are really some significant distance away. It can't be said with any conviction, I don't think, that this is sustainable in those in those terms. So I have significant reservations about this particular case, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Findlow. Who would like to speak next? Councillor Harewood, please.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me?
We can hear you. We can't see you, but then we couldn't see Councillor Findlow either.
Can you see me now?
We can see you now. Please go ahead.
I would like to speak on several items. The first is near to amenities. I'm not agreeing that an application that should bring up amenities, then it means that the other properties have that same problem. And I don't know that that can be raised at this moment as amenities and not applicable to this application. Applicable to this application, but not to the other houses. If there's a problem, I think that's a separate problem. Secondly, I think I am satisfied with the design and the height and the space. And I don't know that those things have not been addressed. Again, the openness, the space alone has been addressed. I really don't know that we can go on buses or highways which is satisfied, provided there are turning points. And we have addressed that if an increase in the size of the property must come back to the planning committee, I cannot see why I could not support this application. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Harewood. Could I now move on to Councillor Tony Dean, please?
Yes, thank you very much. Like Councillor Findlow, I also am extremely protective of the green belt, but I think we're caught in a little bit of a bind here. We all have to obey the law of the land, especially these days with lockdown rules, etc. And the national planning policy framework clearly sets out what the exceptions are in the green belt. And if we don't like it, and I don't, maybe that's where we've got to work. We've got to change the overall policy, which is not only in Cheshire East local plan, but also the national policy. The local plan just copies the national policy, saying that limited infilling in village is allowed. And on the basis of that absolute written clarity, I don't think we have much choice with this particular one, especially as the rules of the limited nature of infill in the neighbourhood plan appear to have been followed. So my view at this stage is that it would be very difficult to go against the officer's recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Dean. Councillor David Jeffrey, please.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, as previously said, I think this application comes all down to the greenbelt issue, and likewise, I don't like developing greenbelt, but in this, in fact, that's the reason why I got into this game. But in this case, we're not actually closing down the greenbelt. The field and the greenbelt is all remains there. It's still the lungs for Higher Point, and it doesn't undermine any of the principles of greenbelt, like urban sprawl or merging of towns or anything like that, which a vitally important function of greenbelt. In terms of the properties itself, I think they seem to fit in well. They're the same style of house. Like the officer was saying, the bungalow now is the anomaly rather than this new house. So I'm actually quite comfortable with this proposal.
Thanks very much, Councillor Jeffrey. Councillor Liz Braithwaite, please.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with Councillor Dean on I can't find a reason to refuse this, although I would like to see the conditions around permitted development that we spoke about earlier. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. Councillor Sally Holland, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I agree with the three previous speakers and would be mindful to accept the proposal, but as a previous speaker mentioned, with permitted development rights. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Holland. So yeah, I will come to Councillor Puddicombe in a moment. I'd like to pick up on that because I raised it a few minutes ago now. I have voted against previous applications on this site. I do feel that the application that's now before us is more acceptable than the previous ones that we've been asked to consider. However, I do have a concern that were we to approve this, it would be very easy to see a garage suddenly being added on either side of what's currently proposed, or potentially a dormer being put in the roof and the building going up again without requiring planning permission from what's before us today. So I'd like to go back to the advice we took from Peter Hooley earlier in the debate with respect to, I think the condition, well, the general condition was removal of permitted development, but I think there was 3 specific areas, A, B and E. I'd just like to seek clarity on that, Mr. Hooley, before I move on to Councillor Puddicombe, please.
Yes, no problem, Chair. Yeah, that's correct. So Class A would be the extensions to the dwelling, Class B would be sort of roof extensions, and Class E would be outbuildings. So if members felt it was only acceptable by controlling the future development in those respects, then it would be the removal of permitted development rights for Classes A, B and E.
Thank you, Mr. Hooley. So, like other speakers that we've heard from so far, probably be moving towards minded to support this with a condition dealing with those three areas of permitted development. Councillor Brian Puddicombe, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I think I'm sort of the same mind as you, really. We've obviously been here before. I do remember the site visit last October, I think it was. So I can picture the street very well. I mean, it is now a fairly mixed street, as Councillor Jeffrey said. So I've got no problems with the actual design for the houses. And like others have indicated, I think the question about the limited infilling has been resolved by the setting of the neighbourhood plan, the HOU1. So I'm minded to think that we've got no reason to refuse it there. I do, like Councillor Finlow, have problems about the sustainability of the location. Higher Poynton is out on the sticks as far as I'm concerned, being a town person. It is some way from, I would not agree with what the report says about facilities being nearby. I would also have highways issues as well. I think Sugarley Road North is I wouldn't fancy reversing out these properties onto the road there. But I think really with the removal of the permitted development rights, I would probably be minded to support this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Puddicombe. Councillor Ian McFarlane, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, following on from Councillor Puddicombe's comments, I don't like building being carried out in Greenbelt if at all possible. It did seem very similar from the past application we've looked at and turned down. But this, if we could have this 3-metre gap at the side and that could be protected, that's something I'd certainly think about. And I will just ponder on that particular one. No one knows the future, what can be put into future development, but I would hope that we can protect it in some way if that's the way the vote goes. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McFarlane. Could I move on to Councillor Nick Mannion, please?
Thank you, Chair. If it helps, and I've listened to the debate on this, if it's appropriate, I'm happy to propose we accept the officer's recommendation, subject to the confirmation or addition of those restrictions on the permitted development rights, A and E. I think there might have been a third one. I can't read my own handwriting, I'm sorry, Chair.
A, B and E, I think it was.
A, D and E, sorry, yeah.
No, B.
I'm happy to propose we accept the recommendations with that addition. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Manning. Can I just clarify? It's A for Alpha, B for Bravo, and E for Echo.
That's as I understand it. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Would anybody like to second that proposal from Councillor Mannion?
I'd like to second that.
Councillor Ailift Harewood, could I just ask you to put your camera on a microphone and repeat that, please?
Oh, one moment. Your camera isn't going on. Oh, wait a minute. I'm trying to do the camera. Right. Can you see me? Can you see? Ah, yes, you can.
I can't see you, but I can hear you. So
You can't see. You can't see me. My camera is on.
no,
I can see me.
Okay.
I'd like to second that. Do I have to call my name?
Just confirm, Councillor Ailift Harewood, that you wish to second the proposal put by Councillor Mannion. Thank you.
I am Town Councillor, Cheshire East Councillor Ailift Harewood, and I would like to second that proposal of acceptance of that application. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So that has now been, sorry, Councillor Findlow, did you wish to come in briefly before I take the vote?
I just wanted to ask, because I don't know, if we remove as extensively as is proposed for good reason permitted development rights, what appeal right does the householder have against that?
I'll invite our planning officer, Mr. Hooley, to address that question.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, any decision we make is subject to an appeal by the applicant. So even the conditions on any approval, and that would be the same with any of the conditions. Yes, it can be subject to appeal, but then the whole decision would be revisited in that light. So an inspector would have to consider the whole package, both with and without that condition. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just pointing out it's not waterproof doing this, Chairman, but it's better than nothing. I quite agree.
Thank you, Mr. Hooley. Thank you, Councillor Findlow. So before I take the vote, officers, is there anything that you wish to come back on to clarify, run through the planning conditions, etc.? Councillor Harewood, we can see you again. I'm not quite sure why. Thank you.
I've turned it off.
Thank you. You've turned it back on again.
Oh dear. Wait a minute. It doesn't work when I tell it to.
Thank you. Mr. Hooley, please.
No, thank you, Chair. Nothing further to add.
That's all great. Thank you very much. So it's been proposed by Councillor Mannion, seconded by Councillor Harewood for approval with an additional condition withdrawing permitted development rights for classes A Alpha, B Bravo and E Echo. I'll now take the vote by roll call. Please could each member indicate whether they are for, against or abstaining on the proposal, sorry, get my words right, proposal for approval. So starting with Councillor Liz Braithwaite, please.
Thank you, Chair. For.
Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. Councillor Tony Dean, please.
Yes, Chairman, I am for the proposal.
Thank you, Councillor Dean. Councillor Paul Findlow.
Against.
Against. Thank you, Councillor Findlow. Councillor Ailift Harewood, please.
For.
Thank you.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Councillor Harewood, I'm taking your vote as for. Councillor Sally Holland, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Councillor Sally Holland, and I am for the proposal.
Thank you, Councillor Holland. Councillor David Jeffrey.
Councillor Jeffrey, for, Chair. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Jeffrey. Councillor Ian McFarlane.
Councillor Ian McFarlane, I'm for the proposal.
Thank you, Councillor McFarlane. Councillor Nick Mannion, please.
Councillor Nick Mannion, I'm for the proposal.
Thank you. Councillor Brendan Murphy, please. I can see you, Councillor Murphy, but I can't hear you. Can't hear you. I think you're on mute.
I've clicked on it several times. Can you hear me now?
Hear you now perfectly.
Right, I approve of the officer's recommendations.
Thank you. I'm taking that as a vote for. Thank you, Councillor Murphy. Councillor Brian Puddicombe.
Thank you, Chair. For.
Thank you, Councillor Puddicombe. Councillor Leslie Smetham. Councillor Smetham, I can hear you. I can see you, but I can't hear you.
Oh, is that better?
That's better. Can you, sorry, Councillor Smetham, can you repeat your vote, please? I can't hear you. I'm going to have to take that as an abstention, I think, if I can't hear you. Do you want to try touching the microphone one more time, because it worked when you put your hand on the microphone next to your shoulder? No.
I'm so sorry for this delay.
That's it. Yes.
I am for this application, Councillor Smetham. I'm so sorry. It is very difficult when your kit doesn't work.
Sure.
It's even worse than it was before.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Smetham. And for myself, Councillor Craig Brown, I'm also going to vote for approval of this application. So I'll just check the maths on this, but I believe that is 11 votes for and 1 against. So that means that this application is clearly approved. Thank you very much, members, for your time in considering that. So we'll now move to the next item on the agenda. I will take a break at the end of the next item. So how quickly we get to that break is completely in your hands. So item number 6 is application number 19/2254M. The construction of 3 dwellings following demolition of the existing dwelling at Fernley, Stanley Road, Knutsford, and the applicant is Mr. Phil Fulis on behalf of PLT Properties Limited. Could I now invite our planning officer, Peter Hooley, to present the report for this application? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So the application at Fernley, Stanley Road, Knutsford, construction of 3 dwellings following the demolition of the existing bungalow and outbuilding on the site. So we have the application site here, shown on the aerial photograph, Stanley Road and Toff Road junction here. I'll perhaps just highlight the context when we go through the photos. See the Knutsford Town Council building there, but we have the Knutsford Town Centre conservation area on this side of the site. It doesn't extend to Libris Place here, but it does extend around the back of that. And then we have St John's Road here and the St John's conservation area in this area here. There's also then an access road alongside the railway line here. That drops down obviously in that embankment. And you've got the existing bungalow here and the adjoining bungalows along St John's Road. So as we go through the presentation, you might hear reference to different places. This is the adjoining property, Tynedale, and these are the apartments at Libris Place, and obviously Booth Supermarket in this area, which members may be familiar with. So again, site location plan just showing that context. Again, you see Tynedale here and Libris Place, and the existing property on the site here, with an outbuilding as in this corner, which we'll see on the site photographs. Now, this is the proposed site plan. Members will have obviously the report, the plans pack. It is quite a bold and contemporary design. So we've got demolition of the existing bungalow. Then there's the erection of a 2-storey detached property in this area here. And then these are 2 3-storey semi-detached properties. Has the appearance more of a sort of apartment building. It has undercroft parking now, which is why it's 3 stories. So most of the accommodation is on the 1st and 2nd floor with the parking underneath. We've got an existing access here off Stanley Road. And then there's a new access being put in further along there to access the single detached dwelling here. You've got 2 parking spaces with each property. So there's 2 underneath each of these. Bin storage is also, and cycle racks are also included, and they are again kept underneath and out of the way in these in the 2 semis here. That's why you'll note that in the report, obviously our urban design and conservation officers are supportive of the proposals, and the urban design officer has gone through our Cheshire East design guide, and obviously that includes things like looking at the green credentials of the building, and you'll notice we've got photovoltaic panels on the roof, and they have electric vehicle charging points and other green sort of facilities, if you like, in the design of this building. Just to be clear on the private garden space, because that has been raised in the representations. So we have this hedging around here along the front of the main road. So we've got a private garden in this area here with plot 1, in this area here with plot 2, and also then the front garden there with plot 2. And with plot 3 here, you've got a sort of more, what is a more limited amenity space here. But to give, again, some ratios to those, if you like, this private garden space here is just under 100 square metres. And this one here accommodates, again, about 70 in the square metres in the front and 70 square metres in the rear. And the smaller one's about 50 square metres overall of outdoor space. So yes, it is more limited than some of the larger family dwellings in the area, but as you note in the report, it's something which does provide that style of accommodation which will be suitable for a number of people in terms of the maintenance of them. So here's the proposed street scene, or essentially the design. So we can see, and I've got some photo montages which will show the design in better quality. But it is a very contemporary feel to the design. We will, as you go through the presentation, you'll note the amenity of adjoining properties is a very important factor, and revisions have been held through the course of this application to make sure the privacy of adjoining properties is adequately protected, and we'll go through those issues. But essentially, a lot of that is achieved by obscure and non-opening windows to windows that could potentially cause overlooking, whilst enabling the future occupiers of those properties to have clear glazing to habitable rooms, which will also be an important factor for any future occupiers of those properties as well. Again, this just shows the style of property. On the rear here, we've got the elevation next to Tynedale. So this block has been developed at a lower height, and although obviously it is, you'll see on the photographs, it's obviously larger than the existing bungalow, but it's been designed in a way to maintain the heights of those bungalows on that corner, and then rise up to the 3-storey further back into the site. This shows the ground floor of the plots. Again, the car parking I was talking about on the underneath plots 2 and 3, and the bin storage and cycle racks. Showing the first floor of the plans, and these stars around here, these are the areas that are all going to be obscure glazed. So that will protect, and non-opening, so that will protect privacy of adjoining properties, and it will ensure though that there are still openable and clear glazed windows to those habitable rooms. And similarly on the first floor level there. Now going through some photographs, so this is a street view looking down St John's Road. So you can see the bungalows down here. We've got the St John's Conservation Area in this area here, which is obviously, as members will know, you've got the lovely period properties in that location. The application site is just off screen here to the left, and that's where we'll see in a minute. These are the bungalows, again, further down St John's Road. And this is looking back up towards Libris Place. So the application site is essentially on this corner here, and we'll see that in the later slides. This is the neighbouring property, Tynedale, and you can just see here the apex of the existing bungalow on the application side. This is the access road that I mentioned that runs down from near the Toft Road, Stanley Road junction down towards the railway. So the site is in here, and you can just see the roof of the existing bungalow there. A photograph of the apartments over the road at Libris Place. So you can see we've got a sort of a mix of design styles in this area. This is again a photograph going towards the site. So this is that outbuilding I mentioned on the corner of the application site. Libris Place here, just shaded by the trees there, and the application site in here. Now here we've got a computer generated image of the proposed building. So as you'll see, it is a bold design. It has been through a lot of work with our conservation and urban design officers, as I say, who, subject to the materials, which is still something that's, you'll note in the report, is left to be finally agreed, subject to getting a high quality of materials, they're now supportive of the overall design. With it sort of establishing an attractive gateway to this part of Knutsford. This is taken from the Booth supermarket entrance, and again you can see Tynedale, the neighbouring property here, and the existing bungalow there, Lidbish Place here. And this is again an image, mocked-up image of the proposal. So again, it is a change to the current situation, and members will need to decide whether this design is achieving the high quality that our urban design officers consider that it is. And you can see here how the heights. So whilst this is a new contemporary design, the heights have been kept down to be consistent with the bungalow on this side. So obviously it's a flat roof, so it does take that wall up, but it has kept that height and massing deliberately on this corner, and then it rises up towards the rear. And again, this is a image taken from sort of the front of Lidbish Place back across to the existing bungalow that you see there. And again, this is again just a computer generated image to give you some idea of the context of the scheme. You can see here, this will be the new access point from Stanley Road. So in summary, the key issues are considered to be design, character and residential amenity. And the objections that we've received do focus predominantly on these matters, although they are all documented in the report. It is a bold and contemporary design, but it's also sustainable, that has the support of the council's officers, who consider it will make a positive contribution to the area and will not harm the adjacent conservation areas. There have been legitimate objections of overlooking that have been received, but with the amendments that have been made, it's now considered they are addressed and that privacy will be maintained to adjoining properties. The Highways Authority are satisfied with the proposals. So in summary, it's considered to be a sustainable development that is compliant with policy. And Chairman, it's recommended for approval subject to those conditions set out on page 37 and 38 of the committee report.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hooley, for that very comprehensive presentation and report. Could I now invite the first of our public speakers on this item, Councillor Tony Dean, who is the Ward Councillor, to turn on his camera and microphone and prepare to address the committee. Councillor Dean, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I called in this application for the reasons given in the papers on page 24. There's been some changes since then, but what I would now like to ask the committee, I would like to ask the committee to refuse this application on the following grounds. I believe it's overdevelopment of this particular small plot and against the very specific policies in the Knutsford Neighbourhood Plan, which I'll come to later. The gardens are too small for adequate family space, and it is not in keeping with the adjacent properties in St John's Road, and denigrates the nearby St John's Road conservation area. You will note that in the CGIs, it was very careful not to take one showing these brand new buildings against the Victorian semi-detached background of St John's Road. That was not shown. There have been previous applications for this site. The last one was a very similar application. This was refused by the officer. And anybody, or all of us in this committee who read the officer's report, will be struck more than any other item before this committee in recent years by the mental and advocacy gymnastics the officers have had to go through to make this application seem acceptable. Consider the details of that. To avoid loss of immunity to neighbours and to future occupants of the proposed 3 properties, I count over 20 windows which have now been told have to be obscured and not opening. Imagine living in that house where above the ground floor you're living in a fog of badly lit rooms with hardly a window to look out of and hardly any windows that open in summer. And they've had to do that. I know it's not a planning issue, but they've had to do that to get over the planning issue of amenity. It's cramming, it's crowbarring things in to make this seem acceptable on balance. Also, we've rammed 3 houses in the space of the garden, in this space. The garden at site 3 is so small, it did just about take a trampoline, I think. It's accepted that it doesn't supply reasonable space for a family. And these are 3-bed family houses. The way the mental gymnastics work to make this acceptable is that there is a small shared front garden shared with Site 2. Anybody who's tried to have a shared garden space, especially the front garden, will realise these are a major area for neighbour dispute, and I just don't think that's reasonable either. To be able to state that the ultra-modern design, flat roof design of Site 1 is acceptable, the officers only really look at the mixed-use development at the other side of the road, Liveris Place, which is also modern. But the site is right opposite the large Victorian house of St John's Road Conservation Area, and next door to a run of mid-20th century bungalows. It would stick out like a very sore thumb. Also, to state that the height of the box-like flat roof building at Site 1 is the same as the ridge of the next door bungalow, although correct, is another example of advocacy gymnastics, as the two buildings present totally different aspects to the street scene, very different. In short, with flat roofs and modern design in this area, it goes against design principles in the Knutsford neighbourhood plans in policies D1 and D2. It also goes against the heritage policy HE3, which is to protect and enhance the conservation area in the Knutsford neighbourhood plan, and also housing policy H2, which is about previously developed and infill development in the Knutsford neighbourhood plan. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Dean. Members, are there any questions that you would like to put to Councillor Dean following that speech? Please could you indicate via the chat function if there are questions, please. Yes, Councillor Leslie Smetham, please.
You could identify other buildings with similar roof lines. I believe I've seen some more modern and more historic buildings that have a similar appearance with the towers in Knutsford. Am I correct there?
Councillor Dean.
Yes, Councillor Smetham, there are all kinds of different architectures around Knutsford. But what I'm stating is that this particular small plot on the corner, which had one bungalow and is now going to add another 5 stories on that one side of the building, in a design which does not fit in with the nearby conservation area, and the CGI didn't really show that. They showed it from an angle that included Liveris Court. Liveris Place, sorry, is across the road. It's in a mixed development area. There's Booth's supermarket, there's a library, there's a meeting room, the Jubilee room, and there's flats. That's a mixed development and is very modern. And yes, I agree that this design fits in with that. It doesn't fit in looking the other way to St John's Road.
Thank you, Councillor Dean. Councillor Sally Holland, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, one quick question, Councillor Dean. Do you think that because it's the design of the house is environmentally friendly, particularly the two to the right-hand side of the plan, do you think that there's been compromise there on design of the properties, like you suggested?
I don't know that trying to make these houses more environmentally acceptable has been a major contributor to the overall design, but I suppose it might have been with the flat roofs, but I can't really answer that question.
Thank you, Councillor Dean. Councillor Ian McFarlane, please.
Yes, Councillor Dean, thank you. Just read your comments on it's not in keeping with the nearby properties on St John's Road. I've been trying to figure out on the map exactly where St John's Road is, forgive me for this, but what exactly are the difference in architectural styles on St John's Road vis-a-vis this new design, please?
Okay, the site in question for this application is a triangular site, and the point of the triangle facing effectively west, that ends on St John's Road. And on the one side, Tyndale, for instance, right next to this development, Tynedale is a bungalow, and along the road there is a series of very similar bungalows on that side of the road, and they're mid-20th century built. On the other side of the road is the St John's Road Conservation Area, which are 3.5 story Victorian townhouses, and they are absolutely beautiful. And this effectively coming up Stanley Road would be in the way of the view to those houses, and would look completely incongruous. So, as I say, the conservation area is the Victorian, very, very large townhouses, and opposite are the bungalows, and this doesn't fit with either of those.
Thank you, Councillor Dean. I believe that's all the questions from members. As you registered an interest at the start of the meeting, Councillor Dean, could I now invite you to leave the meeting for the remainder of this item, and then we will call you back in when we move on to the next item. Thank you. So could I move on to the next of our public speakers? Could I invite, please, Town Councillor James McCulloch, representing Knutsford Town Council, to turn your microphone and camera on and to address the committee, please. You have 5 minutes, Councillor McCulloch.
Thank you, Chair. I trust that you can both see me and hear me.
We can indeed.
Thank you very much for that, Chair. And I thank you for the opportunity to speak to this proposal. I'm proud to be a Knutsford councillor and have lived in the town for over 30 years. Our original objection, and I think there are 5 points to cover in this, was the development would lead to a loss of privacy to adjacent properties on Stanley Road and within the site due to the overlooking of the principal windows to private garden spaces. Also, that the materials palette chosen are not sympathetic to the adjacent conservation areas. The gardens provided for the plot 3, are insufficient, as they do not provide an adequate amount of usable space for family properties. The council is concerned that the proximity of the 3-storey properties to the junction of Stanley Road, the conservation area, will be a narrowing effect to the street scene. I think our first point has been well addressed, that there have been some changes to the windows to make them non-opening. But I refer members back to my my colleague Tony Dean's report on would you like to live in a property where over 30 windows are sealed and glazed over. On the garden point, the officer's report states that each of the 3 dwellings shall be afforded as a private amenity area, garden space, sufficient for them to undertake normal activities and as such, sitting outside, having a barbecue or hanging out washing, etc. Although the level of private amenity space provided to plot 3 appears limited, the plans show an additional amenity area forward of the dwelling proposal on plot 2. We would highlight that the 3 proposed dwellings are 3-bedroom properties, the type of which would appeal to and be marketed as family homes. The Knutsford Design Guide, and bear in mind that this is a complementary guide to the Knutsford Neighbourhood Plan, which in its own right has been award-winning for a market town such as Knutsford. The design guide states at 7.12, good-sized back gardens for family housing are not only an important aspect of retaining Knutsford character, they also act as an informal green corridors, contributing to the sustainability of new housing and existing established garden habitats. No references are made to the garden size and local plan strategy. However, a typical 3 or 4 bedroom post-war home in Knutsford has 140 metres squared of garden. 7.13 layout should protect privacy within the outdoor private amenity space with appropriate separation between backs of housing, I apologise. Spaces should be orientated to avoid overlooking and overshadowing and to minimise sunlight. Get my word mixed up here, do apologise. The layout of the proposed gardens does not meet these designs requirements. Plot 3 has 2 extremely small private garden spaces which would not be suitable for family use. The suggestion that a communal garden would be suitable should not be accepted. This communal garden is at the front of the property along a busy road and pedestrian routes to local supermarkets, and as such would have little privacy. We would express that the Town Council does not consider that the materials palette also is suitable for the conservation areas adjacent. that design cues should be taken from the historic buildings in the town, not the modern block of flats opposite. We would also labour the heritage angle, but the conservation area said, I consider the scheme would improve the neutral impact of the existing bungalows on this unusual corner plot. Furthermore, can I suggest that this development seems to be squeezing a quart into a pint pot. The roof line is far higher than the rest of the bungalows and would certainly present a very crowded gateway with the size of the buildings overlooking the road into this part of Knutsford. Chair, I thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Councillor McCulloch. I believe Councillor Nick Mannion, you would like to ask a question. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for that very thorough presentation, Councillor. I've got two questions for you. Just clarify, this site, is it within or just outside the conservation area? And secondly, you've made great reference to St John's Road. It faces northwards, Stanley Road, if my recollection of Knutsford is correct. And there are some apartment stroke flats there. They're actually behind the rear of the town council offices, I believe. They're fairly contemporary, are they not? And what and how many stories are those flats across the road? I'm asking this question because we've not had the benefit of a site visit, and I am fairly familiar with it. So if you could answer the two questions. Is it within the conservation area, which is fairly straightforward? And could you describe the properties across the road on Stanley Road facing northwards to the site, what they are? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your question, Councillor. To answer your first point, this development is just on the edge of what is known as the St John's Road Conservation Area in Knutsford. And secondly, with reference to the Libris Court development, which was built, I think, about 10 years ago. In I think the town council's opinion, this development would, to a certain degree, dwarf and overshadow that. It's a lot bigger, it's a lot brighter, and it's a triangular development which faces on the rear of which goes on to the road leading down to Stanley Road Trading Estate. The front of it is on Stanley Road itself, and then I think if I was facing it, the right-hand corner just comes to the apex of where Stanley Road and St John's Road converge. So it's in a very important and very strategic part of Knutsford. Knutsford, which again is a market town. I hesitate when I hear the word urban used.
Could I just come back? You say it's on the edge of the conservation area. Is it inside the red line or outside?
It's just on the outside, as I understand, Councillor.
It's on the outside?
Yes.
And how many stories are those flats across the road on Stanley Road? How many stories are they? I'm speculating it's at least 2, possibly 3.
I concur with your thoughts, Councillor. I think they're 2. I could be wrong.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Mannion. Thank you also, Councillor McCulloch. I don't see any further questions from members, so could I invite you to turn off your camera and microphone, but please do stay in the meeting if you would like to listen to the debate.
You're very kind. Thank you.
Thank you. Could I now invite our third public speaker on this item? Could I call Brian Chaplin, who is an objector? Mr. Chaplin, please could you turn on your camera and microphone and prepare to address the committee.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, but I can't at this moment see you.
I can't. I think I'm about to turn the camera on. Yes, here we go.
That's wonderful. But you have 3 minutes. Please go ahead in your own time.
Thank you very much indeed, and thank you to the committee. I'll try to bring all these points together. Just to say that you've heard that we've got conflict with a number of Knutsford Neighbourhood Plan policies, in particular HE2, which is heritage assets, HE3, which is conservation area, and H2, which is a housing policy to deal with infill and previously developed land. Basically, we're about the setting of 2 conservation areas, and the settings are those areas which allow us to understand and to interpret the heritage which is around us. And the heritage for Knutsford has a strong economic value, and this particular area is very sensitive. So, okay, let's say we're at the station. We're looking straight across to the council offices, and Stanley Road is straight ahead. To the right is the town centre conservation area, largely civic. There's listed council offices, library, war memorial, listed courthouse, some residential. What ties them together is their setting. It's green space, it's trees, it's a parkland feel to the front. Now we're crossing over, we're walking up Stanley Road, we've crossed Toff Road, and this view is important, and it's very surprising because as there's a slight bend in Stanley Road, as soon as you've passed the council offices, the change is enormous, because behind those civic buildings of the town centre conservation area, we're, as you heard, into the car park, the Booths supermarket, and the Liberous Place, which are incidentally 3-storey townhouses, and we're into the 20th and 21st century on that side. We're still walking along Stanley Road, but on the left we've got the site in question. It's low rise, it's bungalow, it's garden, it's residential, and in front of us is the old vicarage, which is a striking Victorian structure, replicated all the way along St John's Road on the northern side, and it functions as the St John's conservation area. So important that there are Article 4 directions all over that conservation area. And St John's Road on the southern side is, as you've heard, a series of 1950s bungalows. But the key thing is that there is...
I'm afraid your 3 minutes are now up, so I'll have to ask you to stop there. Are there any questions, members, please? I can't see anything coming forward, so thank you, Councillor Smitham, for confirming you don't have a question. So thank you very much, Mr. Chaplin. Could I invite you to turn off your camera and microphone now? But please do feel free to stay online and listen to the debate that will follow. Could I now invite our final speaker on this item, Georgina Daintith, who is representing the applicant. Could I invite you to now turn on your camera and microphone and prepare to speak to the committee? And you also have 3 minutes. Please begin when you're ready.
Thank you, Chair. I am Georgina Daintith and I'm from Walsingham Planning. I've worked with the applicant on this scheme, and it is an accumulation of 4 years of considerable work and several planning submissions with numerous layouts and design options. I'd like to thank the officers for their support on this application presented today. The applicant has also sought to address the objections raised throughout the planning period. The site is previously developed brownfield land and sits outside the 2 conservation areas. There have been objections raised regarding the overdevelopment of the site. The total development footprint of this scheme equates to 207 metres squared, which is 23% of the whole site. This figure is only 4% more coverage than the existing built form on site. The scheme has been designed to minimise the impact from the street scene and sits comfortably within the context of the area. Objections have also been raised stating it is not in keeping with the area. However, the building sits opposite a modern 3-storey townhouse block. The scheme will be no higher than this apartment. The inspiration for this design is set out in the accompanying design and access statement. It has been agreed with the officers that a contemporary design in this location would provide.
It's not our phone, is it?
Yeah, sorry, it was my
Not our
phone.
phone.
I've switched it off. Sorry about that. It was agreed with the officers that a contemporary design in this location would provide a positive contribution to the area and form a gateway development. The scheme rated green on 8 out of 9 criteria for the Cheshire East Design Guide, with materiality scoring amber. Throughout this application process, the applicant has submitted various material palettes for consideration and has taken on board the comments of the Town Council to incorporate bricks into the construction. This material is now shown on the revised elevations. The applicant is happy to accept a condition on materials, which would mean the scheme meets all 9 design criteria. The scheme provides adequate residential amenity protection. Obscure glazing has been added to all elevations where there is an overlooking issue to address objections submitted by neighbours. Objections were raised on limited amenity space to plot 3. Cheshire East does not have a policy standard for garden sizes, and it is considered by the applicant and the officers that the scheme provides sufficient private space. The scheme represents an efficient use of a brownfield site in a highly sustainable location and meets the policy requirements within the local plan and neighbourhood plan, and has been designed with regard to the objectives within the Cheshire East and Knutsford design guides, and is presented by a local developer with extensive knowledge of the area. I therefore request that the committee consider this application favourably and move to approve the scheme. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs Daintith. Could I ask Councillor Brian Puddicombe, who I believe has a question for you?
Yeah, thank you for your presentation there. Could you say the amount of windows that will be obscured? Do you not think that that would retract from the attractiveness of the property?
No, I don't think so. My client is an experienced developer and understands the market and has worked in Knutsford for a long time. It is a very sustainable location, and I know there is demand for 3-bedroom properties. So I don't think the obscure glazing would put the majority of people off.
Thank you very much for that. I don't see any further questions, members. No, nothing coming forward. So, Mrs Daintith, thank you very much for addressing us today. Could I now ask you to turn your camera and microphone off again, but please feel very welcome to stay online and follow the debate. Thank you very much. Could I now ask our planning officer, Peter Hooley, is there anything that you wish to come back on that's been raised either by the public speakers or during the questions?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Just briefly, I think it may assist members if I just bring out a couple of the plans again, if that's okay, Chairman, just to go through, particularly around the boundaries of the conservation area, and just make sure members are fully understanding of that.
Please do.
Okay, thank you. I'll just share the screen again now. So, I'll just bring the pointer up on the screen here. So as I mentioned before, so we've got the site here, and Stanley Road, Toft Road Junction, which is where we heard about the vistas as you rise up through there, and the bungalow here and Librish Place here. So on the right hand side, you've got the Knutsford Town Centre conservation area, which starts before Librish Place and then moves in this direction. And then you've got the St John's Road conservation area in this area here. And as we heard, these are lovely period properties, set in substantial grounds. And our conservation officer has obviously been fully involved in this scheme. And I think just to point members to perhaps page 32 of their reports, if they wish to just recap on what the Heritage Officer considered about the proposals and how they felt it wouldn't harm the St John's Road conservation area. And I think that's partly because of the way the site tapers away here. So you are going to have a bold new development here. But in terms of how this actually affects this sort of more discrete area of period properties, the Conservation Officer doesn't think it will be harmful. The other point to raise is obviously it is a very bold design, and there's no question about that. And again, referring back to the Heritage Officer's comments, this clearly has a neutral character at the moment on the street scene. It is low rise. So what members need to consider is whether, you know, having a more what is a bold and positive statement, whether that's something that's acceptable or not in that context. And I think that's perhaps the nub of the issue with this application. And then if I can just go through the presentation. Again, the other points to raise are just again to see that context of the site plan, because I think there were some questions around that. So to see how those apartments, these are the 3-storey. So you've got the St John's Conservation Area over here. So you are quite distant from that. And then you've got the lower 2-storey on this corner, albeit, and you will see that from the corner of the conservation area there. Okay, thank you, Chairman. I think if there's any further questions on the plans, that's absolutely fine. I'll just stop sharing the presentation for the time being.
Thank you very much. Mr. Hooley, so I'll now move to questions from members back to our Planning Officer. Councillor Dave Jeffrey, please.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, Mr. Hooley, two questions. Have you got any concerns about the vehicles pulling out of the property onto Stanley Road? Because I know that they're quite big, quite flat gate posts. There's no kind of visibility displays as they're pulling out, and that can be quite a busy road when you're pulling up. People go straight across from the station and heading towards the fairground. It's can be quite a quick road, that. And the second thing was there was quite a few comments about problems with parking on St John's Road, and this will make it worse, which I didn't quite understand. Could you clarify that, how it would make it worse? I didn't really understand it. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Jeffrey. Mr. Hooley, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, we may need to defer to our Highways Officer to answer any questions on the highway safety point around the access. Obviously, they have confirmed that the proposals meet their standards for the new access. In terms of parking, obviously 2 spaces are provided for the dwelling, which is in line with the council's parking standards for a 3-bed dwelling. Also, with it, we are right on the edge of the town centre as well, so we can't get much more sustainable in terms of location. So it certainly would be impossible to insist on any more parking within the site. So yes, I don't think from a planning point of view, whilst there may be existing problems in that area for on-street parking, we wouldn't be able to evidence that this proposal would have a negative effect on that. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Our Highways Officer Neil Jones is online. Mr. Jones, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Hello, Chair. The only thing I'd say is that we're only really looking at one new access point, because there is an existing access point to this property, and the approach on Stanley Road is fairly straight. So we checked the visibility from the new access point, and it meets our standards. So we haven't really got any major concerns about this proposal. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Mr. Jones. Councillor Leslie Smetham, please. We're unable to hear you, Councillor Smetham. Councillor Smetham, you are on mute still. Okay, we'll come back to you, Councillor Smetham. Could I move on to Councillor Sally Holland, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just some clarity, really. I attended a recent pre-application pertaining to a development in my own ward recently, and I was led to believe at that pre-application that obscure windows were no longer acceptable in planning terms. So I was just wondering if I've misunderstood something there. If you could, if Paul could answer that. Thank you.
Mr. Hooley, please.
Yeah, of course, Chair. Yeah, no, there's no sort of planning policy ban on obscure glazing. It's perfectly legitimate to use that where it's required to protect amenity. I think what is important though is that what we wouldn't want to do is have obscure glazing such that, for example, if you imagine having a lounge or a bedroom where it was all obscure glazed, then that's not really providing an adequate standard of amenity for the future occupiers of that property. I think, and whilst, I think we've acknowledged there's a lot of obscure glazing in this scheme, I think what the plans show there, and what you see in your plans pack, is there are a lot of large glazed openings in this design. So the rooms that have those, for example, the living rooms where they've got them, they do have a good sized principal window that will be a clear glazed and opening window. So that is sort of more than adequate in terms of meeting an amenity standard. So we feel that whilst this is unusual in the amount it has to make this work, and that clearly, that clearly has to be acknowledged, that there's no planning reason why that would necessarily be a problem.
Thanks, Mr. Hooley. Councillor Leslie Smetham will give you another try.
No.
That's it. We can hear you now. Yeah, we can see you and hear you, Councillor Smetham.
I don't know. Can you? Is this any better? Is this any better? Is this any better?
Yeah.
No.
Yes.
Can you hear? Okay. I'm fascinated by the green walls, the green balcony, vertical walls. Could I just hear a little bit more of what they consist of? I'm so sorry about this difficulty that's causing a delay.
No problem. Thank you, Councillor Smetham. Mr. Hooley, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Smetham. I think, and that's noted obviously in the design comments in terms of the use of the green wall. These properties also have a green roof, so for water attenuation and to give that greening to the scheme. And that's really featured through the design. So, for example, where there are balcony areas that, again, are having to be protected for privacy reasons, it's creating a sort of outdoor space that also has a green wall within it. So it has used these sort of innovative techniques in the design. Obviously, the detail of that is all down to condition, and that would, but it's now, these solutions are feasible and possible. And I think that's why the design officer has been supportive of this scheme, because of those innovations that feature throughout.
Thanks very much, Mr. Hooley. I don't see any further questions, members, so perhaps we could now move on to the debate. I believe, who's going to be closest? Maybe Councillor McFarlane or Councillor Jeffrey. Would either of you like to lead the debate?
Chair, I can if you like.
Thank you, Councillor Jeffrey.
Yeah, so initially I was concerned about the overbearing effect on Tynedale of plot 1, but in actual fact, looking at the plans, it's with the kind of tiered effect of the plot 1, it's not actually as bad as I thought it was going to be. So I'm really quite comfortable with that. In terms of the impact on the conservation area, I don't really accept that it's going to have such a negative effect, because going down that road, you approach the corner of St. John and Stanley, and the conservation area is effectively obscured. I can't remember what it's like in winter, but in this time of year, it's obscured by trees. So you don't actually have visibility of the conservation area until you pass this development anyway. So I'm comfortable with that as well. In terms of the objections in with the palette, I think it needs to fit in with the immediate area, and I think the palette does, with the 2/3 story flats on the right hand side of Stanley Road. So again, I'm comfortable with that. I think what it comes down to is, I think Mr. Hooley probably said it, in that it's all about preferential. It is bold, it is different, and so personally I quite like it, but that's my opinions. But it's, if the design officer accepts it, I'm quite comfortable going with that. So I would probably go for this development.
Thanks, Councillor Jeffrey. Thank you for opening the debate for us. Could I invite Councillor Ailift Harewood to speak, please?
Thank you, Chair. You can hear me.
We can hear you.
This is a brownfield site. It is not in the conservation area. And my only concern was the number of glazed windows. But that question has been answered and that question has been asked. I do not see it as being not matching the building across the road. And the space to me, as I could work it out, is adequate with very little more than the building that will be taken down. I feel comfortable in not accepting this application. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Harewood. I can see Councillor Ian McFarlane, you said you'd like to ask a question. We have now moved on to the debate, but if you'd like to speak as part of the debate, please do so now.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, it really was a question, but shall I open the debate?
Well, your colleague in Wilmslow did that a few moments ago.
I appreciate that. Well, my initial Councillor Dean told me more detail about the street scene, so that's one which answers a couple of questions. I'm slightly worried about the bulk of this site. There's a lot put on it with very small garden areas. So that's one I'm thinking about at present, and I'll listen to the rest of the debate if that's okay. Thank you.
That's fine. Thank you, Councillor McFarlane. Councillor Brian Puddicombe, please.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, the word bold has been used a lot during this, and I think it's a good word to use. I thought the CGIs showed it up very well. But it is a big building. I would share Councillor McFarlane's concerns about the bulk of it. I think it was Councillor McCulloch possibly mentioned that the developer's trying to get a quart into a pint pot. If it was 2 properties, I might have felt a lot more comfortable with it. Although it is a big plot, I would have to accept that. I certainly don't think it has an impact on the conservation areas. I mean, I like going to Knutsford from an architectural point of view. I think it's got a nice mixture there now. I'm not sure if I would have agreed with the Libris Place whenever it was passed, but it is there now. And I think this would fit in quite nicely with it. I still do have concerns about the number of glazed windows. And I think with 3 properties on there, the gardens are not sufficient. But I think overall, if you think of the question, modern buildings versus Victorian townhouses, I think this modern building would fit in nicely with it. But I would like to listen to the rest of the debate before finally making up my mind. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Puddicombe. Councillor Leslie Smetham, please.
Can you hear me?
We can when you press the microphone.
Sorry,
I think that's the solution.
Sorry, Councillor Brown. I'm assuming everything's okay for me to go ahead. Great, thank you. I have just a few quick points here that I thought of while going through this application and also the documents. We're on a prominent, well-travelled route here, so it does need to be a very carefully thought through scheme. The previous applications, I believe, were quite ambitious in terms of numbers on the plot, so 3 dwellings is more modest. And there's been quite an amount of work undertaken to bring the proposal to an acceptable offer in terms of heritage and design, recognising that the site is in a prominent location and the angling and design is sensitive and sympathetic, I think. And there is mixed development in the area, very much so. And the angles help with the overlooking. I think it will look better than what's there already. And regarding the design of the scheme itself, regarding the gardens and so on, well, some people live in very overdeveloped areas or heavily developed areas and don't even have a garden at all. So I think this is quite a very good compromise. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Councillor Smatham. I did ask that members use the chat facility if they wish to speak. However, I did notice Councillor Murphy and Councillor Finlow's hand go up. If you wish to speak, Councillor Murphy, I could bring you in now.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me now?
We can indeed, yes.
Fine. I would object to this development because I think it's just overdone. I'm not worried about the design. It's a matter of opinion, and I think it would actually be that kind of design would actually fit. But I think that the way it's been jammed into a small plot is just greedy, and I think it's not helpful, and it's not fair on those people who live in the smaller houses, the bungalows at the back. And therefore, I would oppose the proposition.
Thank you, Councillor Murphy. Could I invite Councillor Paul Finlow, please?
Well, I think I must agree with what Councillor Murphy's just said. I've not come across the phrase crowbarring in before. It was used earlier on. It's one I think I might have to recall on subsequent occasions. I appreciate there's a high level of quintessentially it's subjective judgment in terms of design and impact on conservation areas, but I think there is a character issue here relating to the environs of this site, and particularly the very contemporary nature of the proposal. I think it's a case of what I've called before a classic example of architectural dissonance. It doesn't fit in, and I think we should also be mindful of the conditions you're asking people, particularly in new build property, to live in. All right, 20 obscure, non-opening windows sounds excessive. It might be said, well, there are other windows, I don't know, in each room which are not obscure, which one can open, but it does sound excessive to me. Living in a fog was the phrase I think I heard used earlier on, if I recollect correctly, and the size of the gardens, I think, is out of character as well. So I do have significant reservations about this application.
Thank you, Councillor Finlow. Councillor Nick Mannion, please.
Thank you, Chairman. It's a planning balance issue, this, isn't it? And it's a very prominent site. And again, I have to concur with earlier speakers in the fact I think crowbar, cramming, quartz, pint pots, whatever language you use, I think it is you're trying to put too much onto this site. I wouldn't, rather than propose that we go against the officer's recommendation, I'd like to float the idea we defer this matter, and because it's quite clear that there are concerns about the mass and extent of the development on this site, and we defer it so perhaps the applicant and our officers can come up with a slightly less dense, if that's the right phrase, proposal. The number of obscured windows is a massive red flag. That's just not, for me, that is not sustainable lifestyle living. So again, any proposal that can come back that will reduce the necessity for that proportion of obscured window must be an improvement on the scheme in the long-term future. So I'll do it. I'll propose that we defer this item today, and for those reasons, because I do think it is at the moment I can't support the officers, and that's something I rarely do. But I do think, being fairly familiar with the site, having read the report, seen the graphics and listened to the debate, I think there is a more appropriate development of this site that is more sustainable. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Mannion. Before I move on, I'll perhaps just share one or two thoughts of my own on this. I'm not particularly enamoured of the contemporary design, but that's purely subjective, so I remove it from my deliberations. What does give me some concern is the level of the amount of outdoor amenity space for plot 3 as a result of this issue that other members have raised, perhaps cramming too much development onto the site that's available, and so I do have reservations about the impact that may have on future occupants of plot 3 in particular. I can see that there is a second. Councillor Puddicombe wishes to second the proposal of deferral. Before I take that, Councillor Puddicombe, I'll just come back to our planning officer, Mr. Hooley, to see whether he has any comment to make on either discussions that may have already taken place with the applicant, or indeed whether going for a deferral at this stage is a viable option that's open to us. Mr. Hooley, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. My sort of advice at this point would be that, as you'll note from the report, that the discussions over this development site have been ongoing for a long time, and there's been a lot of work trying to get it into, you know, what a position where it's supported by officers due to being what's considered to be acceptable. However, I think the suggestion to defer to ask for a revision or change is not what's before members on the table. So it's not as though we're going back to ask for additional information. Sorry, is my screen frozen there? No, okay. It's not as though members would be going back to ask for more information. So if those issues are such that they're a problem and members think they are an issue, then I think a decision on the application should be made on that basis, rather than defer to try and change something that really is not before us at the moment. Any decision that the council made, it will be open for the applicant to then consider that and consider any revisions if they're feasible. I'm not sure they are, given the discussions that have been had previously, to the extent that members are looking for in terms of the issues of scale and mass. So my advice would be, if there's more information to require, then that would be a reason to defer. But to ask for a change in scheme, I don't think that is a reason to defer, and I think it should be determined with what's in front of members.
Thank you, Mr. Hooley. So I think the clear advice is that we need to discuss and vote on the application that is before us, rather than the one that we perhaps wish was before us. Given that, Councillor Puddicombe, would you still wish to second deferral, or would you withdraw that?
Oh, goodness knows. I think I would still wish to second it if Councillor Mannion still wishes to move it.
I am aware that a number of other people wish to speak. I'll come back to Councillor Mannion as the proposer and then go on to the other people who've asked to speak. Councillor Mannion, please.
Yeah, given the advice we've had from our officer, that deferral in this case isn't really an option. I'm content to withdraw that proposal. So we're now faced with the decision of whether we accept the officer's recommendation or reject it. I will therefore, on this occasion, because of the concerns I've got, regrettably, because I can't support it as it stands, I would propose that we reject the officer's recommendation and refuse the application for a variety of reasons: lack of amenity space, overdevelopment of the site, cramming, whatever the planning terminology is, are my two principal concerns. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Mannion. I'm just jotting down those reasons. So I've got inadequate amenity space, overdevelopment of the site, and one that I've added, which I'm possibly not at liberty to do, but I have anyway, over-intensification.
I'm happy to accept that.
Yeah, which I think is one that we have used previously. I'll now go back in the order that people had said they wished to speak, starting with, sorry, Councillor Puddicombe, your camera's still on. Councillor Liz Braithwaite, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not familiar with the area. but the bulk of the development seems to be crammed into the narrowest part of the plot. So I support everybody who said it's overmassing, and I can't support the application. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. Councillor Sally Holland, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'm minded to agree with all the other speakers. I do think this is a contentious development, and despite the fact that there's a great environmentally friendly development, I don't think that's enough to sway us to vote in favour of this development. And looking at the history of it, there's been so many attempts, you know, a house with 7 flats, a house with 4 terraced houses. It looks as if they've tried everything. I'm not sure if it's been the same applicant every time, and obviously we're only voting on what's before us today. I did have a little bit of concern as to why the boundary walls back in 2005 were raised, and the garage, wondering whether trying to raise heights so that you know, a higher story at a later date would be acceptable, a little bit like in the previous application that we were discussing and voting on, and we've obviously put those permitted development rights in. Kind of goes in line with what we were discussing, where things get changed at a later date. But yeah, at the moment I couldn't accept this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Holland. Councillor Paul Findlow, please.
A less ambitious bid for this site, I think, would find favour. I think it's several steps too far, and I agree it should not be accepted as it stands, without prejudice to any future bid, which I think could well succeed if, as I said, it's less ambitious.
Thank you, Councillor Findlow. I have to say I concur with that. If this had been an application for perhaps 2 properties rather than 3, we might be having a completely different debate now. Councillor David Jeffrey, please.
Thanks, Chair. I think I'm probably a lone voice here, but I just want to make the point that where these properties are, they're not going to be cheap, affordable housing. The people who are going to buy this have options, big options, and they would be buying these properties because they don't want the outside space. They want it close to the town. The footprint of this, as the officer says, it's not significantly bigger than what's on there at the moment. They're going to buy this because they don't want the open space. They want the verandas and stuff like that, and they want to be able to walk down the road to the fairground park. They would be buying it for that reason. Just a point. I think I'm not pushing on an open door on this one. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Jeffrey. Councillor Ailey Tairwood, please.
Thank you, Chair. I can't imagine having a 3-bedroomed house and then share a garden for a family. That's what's bothering me. I don't believe that is a good decision. And I have a problem accepting that on application and buying a house like that, you're expected to share a front garden. I find it not good for health, not good for children, not good for families, not good for growth. And if it can come back with some alteration to that effect, I think I'll be able to support it, but on what it is now, I have a problem doing that. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Harewood. So I'd just like to remind members where we're at. It does feel as though the mood of the meeting is not to support this. However, there is at the moment a proposal on the table from Councillor Mannion for refusal. That proposal is as yet unseconded. Would any member like to second that proposal?
I second it.
Sorry, Councillor Findlow, could you just put your camera on and say that again, please?
I will gladly second, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. So it's now seconded by Councillor Findlow, again for refusal. Before we take the vote, Mr. Hooley, anything you'd like to add or advice to give us?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think it's just to perhaps clarify the specific reasons that go forward before any vote is taken on that, and maybe just a couple of points to bear in mind. the key thing I think that's come out of this is the issue of overdevelopment being put forward. The issue of private amenity space specifically, I mean, just that as an issue in itself has often not been successful in terms of appeal and so forth, because like Councillor Jeffrey said, you do have a choice, if you like, an option of different styles of properties, whether they be apartments with some shared outdoor space or small private amenity space. This development has a mix of those things. So whilst it might not be what everyone would like, it's not in planning terms, there's no specific policy harm. There is mention in the Knutsford Design Guide that we heard, but there are also lots of other things in there about innovative design and so forth, which this proposal would fit with. So my suggestion would be to not specifically mention the lack of outdoor amenity space as part of the reason, but to focus on what the key issues in planning terms were, which were, and I've just jotted something down. So maybe if the members that proposed and seconded it would agree that this sums up their concerns, that the proposed dwellings would result in an overdevelopment of the plot by virtue of their scale and form, and would be overbearing and out of character to the adjoining single-storey residential properties on St John's Road. Therefore, contrary to policies SD2, SC1 of the Cheshire East Local Plan Strategy, and policies D1, D2 and H2 of the Knutsford Neighbourhood Plan.
Sorry, Peter, I was trying to write those down as you were speaking. Could you just run through the policies again?
Yeah, sure. Policies SD2 and SE1 of the Cheshire East Local Plan Strategy.
Yeah.
Policy D1, D2 and H2 of the Knutsford Neighbourhood Plan.
Thank you very much, Peter. Can I just now briefly go back to the proposer and seconder, firstly Councillor Mannion, to check that they're happy with those revisions?
Yes, Chair, I put it in the chat. I'm entirely happy to accept verbatim the office's reasons for rejection.
Thank you, Councillor Mannion. And I think with respect to the comments and feelings that people have expressed in relation to amenity space, clearly the applicant is observing the meeting and will have an opportunity to hear those concerns loudly and clearly. Councillor Findlow, are you also happy with those amended reasons for refusal?
Yes.
Thank you very much, Councillor Findlow. So it's been proposed and seconded, proposed by Councillor Mannion, seconded by Councillor Findlow for refusal for the reasons set out: overdevelopment by virtue of scale and form, and overbearing and out of character, contrary to policies SD2 and SE1 of the Cheshire East Local Plan Strategy, and policies D1, D2 and H2 of the Knutsford Neighbourhood Plan. I'll now take the roll call. Please indicate whether for, against or not voting on the proposal for refusal of this application, starting with Councillor Liz Braithwaite, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm for refusal. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. Councillor Paul Findlow.
For refusal.
Thank you, Councillor Findlow. Councillor Ailift Howard.
Oh, I'm for refusal.
Thank you, Councillor Howard. Councillor Sally Holland.
Thank you, Chair. Sally Ann Holland, refuse.
Thank you, Councillor Holland. Councillor Dave Jeffrey.
Thanks, Chair. Against refusal.
Thank you, Councillor Jeffrey. Councillor Ian McFarlane.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I am for refusal.
Thank you, Councillor McFarlane. Councillor Nick Mannion.
Councillor Nick Mannion, I'm for the refusal of this application.
Thank you, Councillor Mannion. Councillor Brendan Murphy.
For refusal.
Thank you, Councillor Murphy. Councillor Brian Puddicombe.
For refusal, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Puddicombe. Councillor Leslie Smetham, could I just ask you to confirm that you have heard the whole debate when voting?
Can you hear me now?
We can, yes.
Yes, I've had the plug unplugged so that I can hear. I've heard all the representations, but however, I am against refusal. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, Councillor Smetham. And finally, myself, I'm also going to vote Councillor Craig Brown in favour of refusal. So if my maths are correct, that's 2 votes against refusal and 9 votes in favour of refusal. Confirmation of that from our officers. So that is clearly, that application is clearly refused. Thank you very much, members, for your time in considering that. We have now been online for 2 hours 40 minutes, and I think it's quite tiring, quite difficult to follow a meeting online for a great length of time like that. So I'm now proposing a break of 20 minutes to take us to 1 o'clock for people to go and make a sandwich, make a cup of tea, do anything else they might need to do. Is everybody happy with that, or more to the point, is anybody not happy with that? Please indicate, otherwise I'll assume that we're breaking until 1 o'clock. Thank you very much, everybody. See you at 1 o'clock. Sorry for members, could I just add that, could I remind you that the meeting is continuing to be recorded even though we're not discussing, so anything you may say may be picked up by the camera or the microphone, so please bear that in mind during the lunch.
Hi, Helen. Can I just get some clarification on this? I'm having problems with the microphone. When you just click on all,
Point to IT, then, don't we?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Murphy. We'll get IT to have a chat with you about that and try and address it during the lunch break.
Right.
And secondly, for Councillor Harewood, as you've declared an interest in the final item, you are now free to leave the meeting if you wish to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I will leave the meeting.
Does Helen need to change the slide?
Yeah, somebody set it down.
Yeah.
If you just speak.
Okay, members, I have torn myself away from a half-eaten sandwich to reconvene. Sorry, I know it's a pain. As we are reconvening online, I need to do the roll call again. So I'll try and do that as quickly as possible. Just to ask you again to confirm that you're back in the meeting.
Have you got your microphone?
No. So, Councillor Liz Braithwaite, please.
Yeah, here, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Tony Dean.
Yes, I'm here, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Paul Finlow.
Present.
Councillor Ailish Tarwood. Of course, she's left for this item, I forgot, sorry. My fault. Councillor Sally Holland.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Hearing you loud and clear.
Thank you. Councillor Dave Jeffrey.
Yes, Chair. So,
Councillor Ian McFarlane.
Yes, present and well watered, Chair. Thank you.
Councillor Nick Mannion.
Present and eating homemade chocolate macaroons.
Lovely, thanks for that information. Councillor Brendan Murphy.
Present. Did you hear me?
We did indeed. Thanks, right. Councillor Murphy. Councillor Brian Puddicombe.
Yes, here, Chair.
Thank you. And finally, Councillor Leslie Smetham. Can see you but can't hear you. But I can see that you're clearly present, so we'll move on. So, item number 7 is the final application for today, and it's application number 18/4540M, the erection of retirement living housing category 2 type accommodation and erection of extra care retirement accommodation for older people, use class C2, with associated communal facilities, landscaping and car parking. And the application site is the King's School, Westminster Road, Macclesfield, on behalf of the applicant McCarthy and Stone Retirement Lifestyles Limited and Your Life Management Services Limited. Could I now invite our planning officer, Peter Hooley, to present the report for this application? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'll just now share the presentation. Okay, so this is the application for the erection of retirement living housing. That's 31 units, and the erection of extra care retirement accommodation, and that is 58 units. So this site is part of the wider King's School campus in Macclesfield. Before I go through the presentation, I'd just like to refer to members to acknowledge the update report that was circulated on Monday. And just to confirm, that has updates on the viability position with the application and also open space contributions. It does make a change to the recommendation to include additional heads of terms for the proposed legal agreement, as noted in the update report, to include the age restriction of occupation of flats for 55 years plus or spouse thereof. That's already in the main report. The two additions are the provision of a commuted sum for affordable housing of £85,000. We have had since had confirmation from our housing team that that would be able to go forward towards projects in Macclesfield. Ideally, the projects that are specifically going to be council-led, that are in the pipeline, but failing that, projects which are currently up and running for Plus Stay in the Macclesfield area. And the public open space comprising of, again, a commuted sum of, that should be £15,000 to make £100,000 in total, not rather than 15,500. So that the recommendation is amended with that, subject to the conditions set out in the main report. I also have one further correction to make to the report. It sets out the number of car parking spaces There have actually been 4 additional car parking spaces provided in the most up-to-date revised plan. So there are now 67 spaces provided in total. Okay, so this shows an aerial photograph of the site. I'll just bring the pointer up so we can see there the existing campus. We'll show this in wider context as well of the King's School campus. We've got Newhall Street here, Core Street here, and Westminster Road here. This is just a plan just to give some context to the overall developments that this just is a small part of. Obviously, we have the new King's School, which is under development at the moment at Derby Fields, and then the redevelopment of the Westminster Road and Cumberland Street campus, and the Fence Avenue campus, which is currently subject to planning application. So in terms of how this site fits into the Westminster Road and Cumberland Street campus, this is the site here, as we've just seen. To the north, you've got a residential scheme that's currently being built out by Bellway Housing, and then there's a proposed scheme that's in the pipeline for Hillcrest Homes on this site here, and this is where you've got the existing sort of historic listed buildings of the school on this part of the site. So this site of this application is part of the campus that extends down across Core Street. And again, just showing that location planning context. So we can see the 2 proposed blocks fronting Westminster Road and Core Street. There is an existing access into the site, as members will be aware, off Westminster Road. The proposal is for access that to be closed up with the stone wall continued to fill the gaps of the existing, and for new access to be brought in from Core Street. And this is shown more clearly on this plan here. So here's the new access point that would be proposed off Core Street, the adjacent properties on Core Street and the adjacent properties on Newhall Street. And then up here, this is where the new Bellway development will be when that's completed. Important as we go through the photos for members to recognise the context of the frontages, particularly on Westminster Road and Core Street. We'll see that in terms of public vantage points, they are the 2 key areas for consideration. It is obviously a new big building that's going on the site. It's key, getting the design right has therefore been important, along with maintaining this green frontage, because the tree canopies along Westminster Road and the corner with Core Street make up an important part of that character. So the scheme does achieve that, and the building will sit behind that frontage, along with the traditional stone wall as well. Again, this shows those street scenes now. So the top one here is from Westminster Road street scene. So this would almost be as you were stood in Sainsbury's, essentially looking back across the road. Obviously, you wouldn't see that because you've got a lot of trees on that side of the road as well. But that's the indicative street scene. You can see the building takes its step down with the natural topography of the site, and comes down to a level that's commensurate with the proposed scheme that will sit next to the site on the Bellway side. And then you've got a prominent feature as a corner turner with Westminster Road and Core Street. You can see that here as well. And there are features that have been added through the evolution of this scheme, such as these bay features which come out to give the building greater articulation. Similarly with the balconies, to give more of an active frontage. So whilst it is a large continuous frontage, it is broken up, it does have articulation, and there are conditions proposed which will seek to enhance that further, such as ensuring that the windows sit behind a reveal of at least 100 millimetres to give that greater articulation to the design of the building. This is just a more detailed picture of the same elevation. Now this shows the internal elevation, so this would be the view if you were stood within, so if you were stood here essentially looking back into the site, so from within the complex itself. And this is the elevation that would front onto Core Street. And you can see this has been dropped down at this end to take account of the residential properties further along Core Street. And these side elevations, this one would be the one that would side onto the side properties of Core Street, and this one would actually be an internal elevation that's sort of largely hidden from view. I've also put on here a tree constraints plan. Again, all those details are noted in the report. The mature trees, as I mentioned, are an important part of ensuring the character of this scheme works well. There is one tree, as noted in the report, to be removed, and that's this mature beech tree here, T4. Essentially, the only reason that it's been removed because it's been identified through the study to be diseased, and therefore is a risk to essentially fall into the road ultimately. So it will need to be removed as part of the scheme, but there would be a commensurate replacement with a 2-for-1 planting scheme. And that just shows, so members, avoidance of all doubt which tree that is. So that is this large beech tree that's diseased. But you can see the other trees along Westminster Road, how that really does form an important part of that character. This is looking from the southeast corner of the site, sort of on the higher level part of the site. You can see the existing buildings aren't of any particular architectural merit. This photo gives context of the existing boundary along to the neighbours at Core Street, and this runs along here down to the side elevations of the neighbours on Newhall Street. You can just see in the distance there the new Bellway scheme that's under development. This is showing the boundary with Newhall Street, and this will have to be enhanced as part of the proposals, and again showing the other side elevations there. This is looking back up the site towards Core Street there, again showing the existing arrangement on that side of the site and the existing conditions which those neighbours have with the development on the site. And this is again showing where Newhall Street terminates at the entrance to the site. So there is an emergency access through here, I believe, but then you have the actual complex itself behind there. This will all be opened up, so the buildings there will obviously be gone, and you'll have more distant views of the apartment block on the Westminster, as it goes towards Westminster Road. This is looking back from Core Street, so this isn't part of the development site. This is just to give context of the surroundings. So this is looking back up to the Cumberland Street part of the campus. So you can see the listed buildings in the background there. And then you've got these sort of more later unsympathetic additions that currently front onto Core Street. This is looking into the site itself along Core Street. So you can see the existing buildings on the campus there. Again, nothing of any particular architectural merit that needs to be retained. And equally, this rather unattractive footbridge will also be going as part of the proposals. This is showing the existing access again that will be closed off, and with the stone wall here you can see that will be continued. This is a shot taken further back from the corner of Westminster Road and Core Street, and this will now show the montage of the proposed scheme to give an idea of context as to how that will sit in the street scene. So this is the proposed building. So you can see it has much more presence than the existing buildings. It's got a strong presence with a good focal corner turning section to the building. And then as it graduates down the hill of Westminster Road and then also along Core Street. Similarly, you can see this is the existing building as you see it from Westminster Road. Again, nothing of anything, not attractive buildings at the moment. Although, again, because of this tree frontage, that does screen that to a large degree. And then this gives an indication of what the building will look like if it is approved and built. So it's this part of the building here that is the application scheme. You can see how that will sit next to this is the indicative neighbouring housing development. So you can see how that will sit in context next to the scheme that's underway at the moment. And then finally, we have the view looking west on Core Street, again with the existing residential properties here and the school buildings here. and this is an indication of how the new scheme will fit in that street scene. So giving a much more active frontage than it has at present. Again, retaining the stone wall and the mature planting. The ground does drop away slightly, so it's not too overbearing on the street scene and works well against the existing residential properties. So in summary, this is brownfield development. As set out in the report, it is providing much needed specialist housing and extra care accommodation in a sustainable location. So overall, there is a real positive and social economic impact from this development. The design has been through numerous iterations and revisions and is now considered to be acceptable. All the site planning issues are now considered to be addressed, which include amenity and highway impacts. Particular importance, the viability has been independently tested. So as set out in the report, members will note that the scheme does not provide a surplus for Section 106 contributions, although officers have negotiated that £100,000 as set out in the update, again for the reasons set out in the update report. And that will go towards an off-site affordable housing scheme and improving open space in the local area. So as such, the recommendation is to approve, subject to the conditions and the completion of the Section 106 agreement as set out on page 62 and 63 of the committee report and in the update report.
Thanks very much, Mr. Hooley. We have 2 public speakers registered for this item. So now can I call the first of those, Town Councillor Fiona Wilson, representing Macclesfield Town Council. Councillor Wilson, could I now invite you to turn on your camera and microphone and prepare to address the committee?
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you. My name is Fiona Wilson and I'm speaking on behalf of Macclesfield Town Council. Our planning committee has discussed this application and our comments cover a wide range of concerns that are detailed at page 45 of your application pack, or your agenda pack. Whilst the design of the scheme has been amended on 2 occasions, our concerns remain. And this afternoon, I'm going to specifically address 3 points. Highways issues and parking provision, the loss of privacy to existing residents, and affordable housing. Highways issues. Core Street is already very congested and has busy junctions with Beach Lane, Pownall Street and Westminster Road. The current access to the site is via Westminster Road, and the Highways Authority have clearly indicated that it is their preference for this access location to be retained. The new proposed access to the site will be directly opposite the proposed access to the underground car park at the redevelopment of the King's School Historic Site, planning application 191068M, and this is certain to ensure traffic chaos on an already very busy road. This also raises the question as to why the various planning applications for the King's Boys' School site have been split into 3 separate applications, since they all have an impact on both traffic and parking provisions in the area. Car parking provision has been set at 67 spaces for 89 units, including only 7 for staff. Cheshire East Council parking requirements for sheltered or retirement housing would require 82 parking spaces as per Appendix C of the local plan, so there's clearly a shortfall. The provision of only 3 electric vehicle charging points at first occupation is clearly not going to be enough, and with both Cheshire East Council and Macclesfield Town Council declaring a climate emergency, the implications of this have to be carried through into planning applications. The suggestion that very few car trips will be made by residents is old-fashioned and outdated. There will be an age occupation criterion of 55 and above. With many people working long after this age, residents are very likely to have a vehicle. And whilst the site is close to the town centre, this is an uphill journey, and it's far more likely that older residents will drive into the town centre. The report before you states that there is as much a need to consider open space and recreation for all ages, and exactly the same principles applies to car parking provision. On-street parking is already an issue in the surrounding area, and the parking provision and the electrical vehicle charging point provision are inadequate. A loss of privacy to existing residents. Core Street and Newhall Street properties will be overlooked by the new building on Core Street. This building in the main is 4 stories high, whereas the current building, as we've just seen in the presentation, is only 1 story high. Residents will therefore suffer from overshadowing, loss of sunlight and loss of privacy. The report before you quotes Save Macclesfield Borough Council planning policy DC 38, which requires new residential developments to generally achieve a distance of between 21 metres and 25 metres between principal windows. However, the proposed building is 4 stories high, only dropping to 3 stories immediately next to Core Street, and so the distance should be 28 to 32 metres. Elevation H, as we've just seen on the presentation, will be the view from the properties on Core Street and Newhall Street, and at 3 stories high will loom over the neighbouring properties and will lead to a loss of amenity and privacy for existing residents, as well as a loss of light, all material planning considerations. Finally, on affordable housing, Macclesfield Town Council does not accept the statement that providing 9 units of affordable housing is unviable, and therefore consider the Section 106 contribution to be inadequate. The report before you states that National Planning Guidance advises a minimum profit level of 15 to 20% of gross development value, and the developer is assuming 20%. The update report advises that the developer's total offer of £100,000 towards Section 106 contributions represents the difference between 15% and 20% GDV for profit. The allocation of £85,000 for affordable housing will not go anywhere near providing 9 affordable homes and flies in the face of the Cheshire East Council local plan, which clearly states that affordable housing is, quote, much needed. Policy SC5 states that viability assessment should only be permitted in exceptional circumstances. Permitting affordable home provision to be reduced or bought off is becoming a trend in planning decisions in Cheshire East, which must be halted if we are to provide economic and social well-being in Cheshire East, as stated in the local plan. For all these reasons, Macclesfield Town Council ask you to oppose this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Thank you for sticking to the time as well. Members, any questions for Councillor Wilson, please? Please indicate in the chat. Just not looking like it. In that case, Councillor Wilson, thanks very much for speaking to us today. Please, could I ask you to...
I did put my name in.
You just made that, Councillor Manning. I was just about to move on to the next speaker. Please go ahead.
Councillor Wilson, you mentioned affordable housing. What would you say is an approximation of the market value of a 1-bedroom ground floor flat in the Macclesfield area at the moment? Because obviously their contribution was, you say, how many thousand? And how does that compare to what it would cost to buy a single property?
Well, £85,000 wouldn't even buy half a property in Macclesfield.
Thanks very much for that very succinct answer as well. No further questions from members, so thank you, Councillor Wilson. Please now turn off your camera and microphone, but do feel free to stay in the meeting and observe the debate.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Could I now invite our second speaker, Mr. Chris Butt, who is the agent for the applicant. Please could you turn on your camera and microphone and prepare to address the meeting. Thank you, Mr. Butt. You have 3 minutes, and please begin when you're ready.
Thank you, Chair. I'm McCarthy & Stone's planning consultant, and my client is delighted to be able to present this proposal before you today. It is a very well-located site that is ideally suited for the provision of much-needed specialised accommodation for older people. As you may be aware, the site benefits from an existing outline planning permission for residential development. This development will provide 2 types of accommodation. The larger block will deliver retirement living plus extra care accommodation for the frail elderly, typically in their mid-80s on entry to the development, providing an on-site restaurant together with 24-hour staffing and a care team, along with other communal facilities, including a residence lounge, secure entry system and guest suite. The smaller block will deliver retirement living, sheltered accommodation for less active older people, typically in their late 70s on entry to the development. This scheme will have a manager during normal working hours and a 24-hour care line amongst its communal facilities. Based on McCarthy & Stone's extensive experience in the delivery of these types of accommodation, the vast majority of occupiers will be downsizing from property in the local area or moving closer to family. The scheme will therefore help address the existing and growing need for specialised accommodation for older homeowners in the Macclesfield area. We have worked very closely with your officers and engaged with the local community. Following discussions with local residents and ward members, we have now reverted back to a traditional the traditional design approach that we originally started with. The scheme has also been reduced in height and massing following the design officer's advice. It is a high quality design that will be sympathetic to its surrounds, and it will not prejudice the amenities enjoyed by existing occupiers. The scheme has been considered by all relevant statutory consultees, including the local highway authority, and they have no objections to it. Schemes before you deliver much needed specialised accommodation for older people on a sustainably located site, together with a financial contribution towards affordable housing. Your officer has recommended approval, and we would be grateful if you could endorse that recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Butt, and thank you also for sticking to the allotted time. Members, are there any questions that you would like to ask? Councillor Mannion.
Yes, thank you. It's on the affordable housing issue. I'll leave the viability assessment for the officers later. Could you confirm for me if it is the policy of your organisation not to provide affordable housing on site, but instead to meet that legal obligation by way of a financial contribution? And if that is not the policy of your organisation, can you tell me what proportion of developments you've made in the Cheshire sub-region, so we call it, that have actually included 30% affordable housing in recent years? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mannion. Mr. Butt, please.
Thank you. So it's certainly not McCarthy & Stone's policy not to provide affordable housing on site. It relates to the specialist nature of the accommodation that it's before you, and with this type of specialised accommodation, not possible to mix tenure within the block, owing to the fact that there are shared communal facilities within the buildings, and it is not possible to charge different service charge rates for the use of those shared facilities. As a result, where affordable housing has been requested from an authority, in the vast majority of cases, following viability review, we agree a commuted payment to provide off-site affordable housing. That's the approach that McCarthy & Stone takes. With regard to other schemes in the Cheshire region, I don't have the figures to hand, but we have certainly made significant financial contributions to other schemes in the area, in the North Cheshire area. The two most recent schemes being at Hamforth and Wilmslow, and significant financial contributions were made on both those schemes.
Thanks very much, Mr. Butt. I will come back to you, Councillor Mannion, but I'm aware that there are other speakers waiting to put their question to Mr. Butt. So in the interest of fairness, I'll move on to them and then come back to you if your question hasn't been addressed. Councillor Braithwaite, please.
So thank you, Chair. Mr. Butt, do the care staff live permanently on, are they located permanently on the site, or do they travel in on a one-by-one basis? It's regarding traffic journeys in and out of the location. Thank you.
Thank you. In terms of the staff, the extra care, the larger block, There will be a sleepover facility, so there will be at least a member of staff who would sleep over. But in McCarthy and Stone's experience, typically staff live in the local area. They may well actually be close enough to walk to the site or use public transport. In terms of the traffic generation, there will be a significant reduction compared to the existing traffic generated by the school use of the site. And based on McCarthy and Stone's experience of these types of developments, we anticipate that there will be only around 83 journeys in and out across the whole scheme.
Thank you. Councillor Brian Puddicombe and then Councillor Brendan Murphy. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Those figures that Mr. Butt just quoted do amaze me, but I'll come back to that later. You mentioned that people buying these units would be downsizing, freeing up family homes or moving nearer to families. Do McCarthy and Stone measure the distance that people do move to get into their units? In other words, I'm sort of asking how many people may come from outside of Macclesfield to buy these units.
Yeah, McCarthy and Stone continually monitor where their purchasers originate from. And as I said, the vast majority, it's a local need. As I said, the typical ages of the residents on entry are around about 78 for the retirement living and about 83 for the retirement living plus extra care. And we find at that age, it's usually a needs-driven move. Usually the death of a spouse or potentially a fall in the home. And residents don't tend to, they want to remain in the heart of the community and in an area where they've got their existing friends and family connections.
Thank you. Councillor Brendan Murphy, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Could I ask the gentleman? He said that you said that your development was sympathetic to the environment. Can you just explain to me in what way? What was it, or is it sympathetic?
It was in terms of the design and appearance and the use of materials that will be used on the scheme.
Sorry, in what way is that material and design sympathetic?
Well, we feel that it's something that will harmonise with existing developments in the area. We spent a lot of time speaking to local residents, local ward members, as well as your council's design officer, and a great deal of work has gone into the design and appearance of the scheme.
Have you been, well, I assume you have, but it's sort of for the record, you've been down Core Street several times.
Yeah, yes, I have, yeah.
You know about the volume of traffic that goes down Core Street? I
am aware of it, yes.
Yeah. Are you happy then? Do you think it's right that more traffic should be poured onto that street?
Well, I'm not a highway expert, obviously, but the scheme has been carefully assessed by your own local highway authority officer, and given the nature of the accommodation proposed, the traffic generation, which for each of the McCarthy and Stone apartments, it's typically around about 1/7 of the level of a family home. So we are talking about low levels of traffic generation, and we're satisfied that adequate provision has been made.
Sorry, could you just clarify why you think there's a low level of volume of traffic coming from the development?
Well, McCarthy and Stone have delivered over 1,300 developments nationwide, so they're constantly surveying the traffic movements at those developments, and that helps inform schemes going forward in terms of parking provision and the nature of the accesses.
Did you, McCarthy Stone, did they consider traffic being moved. If you flopped over the development, if you put it the other way around, so the traffic entrance from the traffic would have come into a new exit road onto the main road, Westminster Road. Was that considered?
When we have discussions with the local highway authority, the preference was for the access to be on the minor road, namely Core Street, rather than emerging onto the more major road.
Just one last point then. The issue of the division of people between the very poorly, seriously handicapped people and others, the more active. What's the spread of them? Whereabouts are they? I've not seen that in any of the documentation. Which parts of the building will be for? I mean, all right, let's put it this way. Could it be that the seriously handicapped people will be put in the highest level of the flooring? I mean, I assume they're not. I would assume okay at the bottom part, but there's no indication of where they would go. How you would spread the.
The residents ultimately purchased their apartments themselves, so they would choose where they wanted to live. But in terms of the actual position, there is level access throughout both buildings, and there is a lift provided within the retirement living block, and there are actually 2 lifts provided within the retirement living plus extra care block. So there will be no need for the residents to have to use the stairs.
Thanks, Mr. Butt. I've got several other speakers waiting, Councillor Murphy. So if I could move on, please.
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, Councillor David Jeffrey, please.
Thanks, Chair. Hi, Mr. Butt. Just going back to the affordable housing provision and the contributions. So of the negotiations that you've had to date, are they the absolute bottom line? Because it goes back to your organisation's policy, because I've just looked at the Hanforth and the Wilmslow developments, and both of those have come down to viability assessments as well. And I would have thought with significantly lower contributions than is required by our standards. So I'm just wondering, with McCarthy and Stone's vast experience, apologies, I've got a German Shepherd barking downstairs. Their vast experience, I would have thought they'd be able to appraise their development opportunities a bit better.
Well, ultimately, McCarthy and Stone has to compete on the open market for the sites along with all other potential developers. So that's ultimately what McCarthy and Stone's up against. It's actually over 30 years before they've been able to acquire a site in Macclesfield itself. So these opportunities are actually few and far between. So that's the context in which McCarthy and Stone has to operate. But both obviously national policy and your own local policy puts viability at the heart of consideration of the amounts of money that developers are able to put forward to fund planning contributions.
Thank you. Councillor Sally Holland, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just a quick question, Mr. Butt. I was just wondering if you find in your experience developing these type of retirement accommodation, if you find it, obviously they're quite local to the town centre, aren't they? The proximity. So do you find that residents start to walk more rather than utilise their cars? And is that the reason why there's not quite so many car journeys and therefore required spaces?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. We've got a transport consultant who actually did a PhD on the transport-related characteristics of these types of developments. And one of the key findings of his survey was that the decision to give up the car generally coincides with the life change that occurs when a resident will give up a family home and move into either, in this case, a retirement living or a retirement living plus development. They find, obviously, as you say, developments are one of the key factor for McCarthy and Stone is location, and they have to be satisfied that local facilities are within a reasonable walking distance, bearing in mind, as I said, the age profile, typically 78 for the retirement living, and typically 83 on entry to the retirement living plus extra care.
Would you comfortably say that a retirement development like this of 89 units will generate less traffic than, say, the school, which was obviously what the site formerly was?
I'm very confident that the traffic generation will be considerably lower than that generated by the school.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Paul Findlow, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Could you just please rehearse what the specific reasons are that prevent you from being able to continue to use the current Westminster Road access, please?
I'm not qualified as a highway engineer, so it's slightly outside my sphere of expertise, so I can't give a detailed response, other than to say both our own traffic consultant and the representative from the local highway authority believe that the access should be positioned on the minor road, Hall Street, as opposed to the more major road, Westminster Road.
Well, perhaps when we move to questions to officers, we might bring Neil Jones in on that for review in a few minutes' time. Councillor Nick Mannion, did you still want to come back in, or has your question been addressed already?
Thank you, Chair. One of them has, by Councillor Jeffrey, very kindly raised it. I too have done my homework at your recent developments in the sub-region, and I can't find a single one where you have felt able to provide affordable housing within the curtilage of your scheme. In every case, you provided off-site financial provision. Oh, can I just ask the question? So does your business model preclude affordable social housing within your developments? And does your business model allow for the payment of off-site financial contributions for affordable housing rather than on-site provision? Because I can't find anywhere you've done anything on-site. Sorry.
Okay. I'm not aware of schemes within Cheshire East where provision has been made on-site, but we have done a couple of larger sites in Stockport where there has been sufficient space to provide separate blocks of affordable housing. There's one at Hazel Grove near to the Sainsbury's, and there's another scheme, I believe, in Romiley. But it's certainly not a case that it's McCarthy & Stone's business model. It's more to do with the actual specialised nature of the accommodation that they deliver. The heart of it is that the Landlord and Tenant Act dictates that you cannot charge one service charge for one group of residents and a different charge for another, along with the host of issues that would go along with that in terms of potential disagreement between residents when they find out that perhaps one part of the development is subsidising another part.
Thank you, Mr. Butt. I don't see any further questions from members, so in that case, could I invite you now to turn off your camera and microphone, but please do feel free to stay online and follow the course of the debate. Thank you very much. Could I now just invite our planning officer, Peter Hooley, to come back in? Are there any issues that were raised during the questions or public speeches that you would like to come in and address? And I think also we might invite Neil Jones to do the same. So there are a number of highways issues raised there.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And I sense, listening to the questions so far and the information from the public speakers, I sense that key issues members are going to want to find out more about are on the affordable housing position and highways in particular, amongst some of the other detailed issues that were mentioned as well. But just to start off, I think in principle on the affordable housing point, I think yes, with any development, housing development, nature development, our policy is obviously to look for affordable housing and to have that on site. And then if that's not feasible, off-site provision or contribution, and then ultimately, in some cases, obviously, we get to the point where the viability exercise that's done will show that a scheme cannot tolerate or bear the cost of affordable housing in it. When we get a scheme presented to us like that, we do an independent financial appraisal. So that is tested completely independently to make sure that the figures stack up. That information is all out there on the website with the appraisal. That has been done, and we are at the situation where this site is not going to be able to bear the costs of affordable housing. We have negotiated a relatively modest sum to go to off-site contribution, but even then, that's on the basis that even if the applicant were to agree to a 15% profit margin of gross development value as set out in the report, which by the way they don't, I should add, but even if they did, the viability figures do actually show that the scheme would only generate that £100,000 surplus. So there is really, with the figures we've got and that we've tested, there is with the scheme at hand. So that is literally really to some extent a matter of fact as to where we are. So then it's a question of, okay, well, is the development then sustainable in its own right because it's not providing that affordable housing? But that's where I think we must make sure and I think we could all agree that that's a negative of the scheme, that it's not providing that, and that's again set out in the report. But I think what members must consider is how that's in the context of the overall provision and the benefits that this scheme will provide. As I say, a brownfield site, specialised accommodation where all our numbers are showing, you know, the demographics of Cheshire East, there is clearly a need for this type of accommodation. It also does have a track record of freeing up other accommodation in the borough. So it has a positive cycle in the housing market, as well as the fact that it is very close to the town centre, so all the benefits that brings in terms of both those residents themselves seeking services in and around the town, which is good, you know, good on a general point for those local services, as well as obviously the employment and economic benefits that derive directly from the development itself. So I think whilst I understand that affordable housing is going to be a big issue here, I think it's very important that we also put that in the overall context of the of what this development offers, because clearly it is a negative